Hey, what is going on, everybody, and welcome to this stream and this React tutorial that's going to be posted up later. Super excited to do this. We are going to be doing an entire React crash course live. So this is something that I've been wanting to try out for a while. It's absolutely a new concept to me, and we're going to be streaming a course, so we'll see how it goes. And also, there is a free Udemy version of this entire course down in the link description. That link is going to be posted for 3 days. So whoever gets it from this point on up until, I guess, 3 days after, that link will expire. So if you want the full course, it's basically going to be a more cut version of this, a little bit more clean, as opposed to me live coding, maybe messing up and interacting with the audience a little bit here. So in this stream, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be building out this to-do app here, or actually it's not a to-do app, it's a notes application. And the entire purpose of this is to learn React and build something simple enough to where we can go through the basics of like CRUD operations, where we can do create, update, read, and delete functionality. So in this entire application, it's pretty simple, but it looks kind of cool here. So I'll point out some of the features. Some of the things we can do here is go ahead and modify any note that we want. When we go back, automatically that note will save. So if I go back to that, I guess it didn't save. I'm not sure why. Let me try doing a refresh. When I go back, that note should save. Okay, there we go. So it kind of works seamlessly, and it updates without us actually having to hit some kind of complete button or submit button. So it's kind of cool that way, and it's supposed to represent one of my favorite notes app that I actually use on the iPhone. I'm not sure if it's anywhere else. I don't think it's on Android, but yeah, that's kind of how it works. So I wanted to replicate that. Now we can also delete notes. So if I want to click on something, I can go ahead and delete a note. That gets removed, and so on. Now, if I want to add a note, I can do the same thing. I can either hit done or just go back, and that's going to save the note. So this is what we're building in this course here. So right now I have Praveen on with me. He is a great Django developer, somebody that works more on the back end with me. He's going to be helping me in this stream. He's somebody that I gave early access to in this course. So he will be watching the chat, interacting with everybody. When he comes back, I'm going to bring him on. I'll have him say hello. And yeah, Praveen will just jump in anywhere he needs to. So I do have music on. So if anybody doesn't like that, if that's distracting, let me know. I typically code with music, so that's going to be on in the background. If it's too loud, I can also turn it down. So Praveen, it seems like you are back here. So go ahead and say hello. This is Praveen. He just took the course, and he's going to help out here. So yeah, say hello to everyone, Praveen.
Hello, everyone. How's it
going? Praveen, his YouTube channel is actually in the link description. So if you want to check him out, he does more Django stuff. So yeah, new React developer, more of a Vue person or Vue.js. And this was his first time trying React. So he will be helping us along here. So let's go ahead and get into it. And let's talk about React first. So here's what's going to happen. This course is for complete beginners, but if you're somebody that knows React just a little bit and you want to build out a cool project, it's also going to be good for you. So it's kind of for everybody at this point. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to start with an introduction to React itself. So I want to give you a background of React. So if you already understand this part, maybe you can skip through, but I want to talk about how single page applications work, how React works, its purpose, and all the things that it's supposed to accomplish. Then we'll get into setting up a basic React application. I'll do an overview of all the file structures and everything that is supposed to go into a React application. And then we're just going to move on to actually building out the application. Now, for this, we don't have a backend. So what we're going to do is use something called JSON server. And this creates like a replica of a backend. So we can actually get some API data and make calls. So we're actually going to be using fetch to make these API requests. So that's how we're seeing these things get updated and so on. So that's what we're going to do here. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, I am going to be pulling up a couple of slides here as we go. I have a couple of screens here, so I have my notes, and I will do my best here. So the first thing is, what is React? For those of you that are completely new, React is a front-end framework or a library. Some people like to call it that way. That's actually the technical definition, but it's really a front-end framework designed for building out user interfaces. So in short, it's basically a set of tools and a structure that we can use to build out our UI. So everything that you see in the front end of a website, when you log on to a website or when you just visit one, everything that you see, that is what React is going to help us build. So all the components of a website, all the functionality that you see in interactions, this is what React is supposed to help us accomplish and make easier for us. Now, React was built by Facebook in 2013. It compares to other, well, actually it was built in 2011. Their big release was in 2013, and it compares more to other front-end frameworks like Angular, which is built by Google. There's also Vue.js, Svelte, and a couple of other ones out there, but there's a lot of other good frameworks out there. React is definitely one of the top out there. So if you're in the camp of trying to figure out whether React is the right choice for you as far as the job market, as far as the industry and the support that you can get when you're building out a React application, well, React was built by Facebook, by some of the world's top engineers, and it's used at Facebook too. So Facebook uses React inside of their UI for their website. Instagram, also owned by Facebook, uses it. Companies like Airbnb, Netflix, Dropbox, and that list goes on. So a lot of companies are using it. Very credible, and more small companies are using it too. So as far as the job market goes, it's definitely one of the top frameworks out there, or front-end frameworks, if not the top one when it goes to the job market and so on. So it's a loved framework used by a lot of people. So when I was interviewing for a position at one point in my life, I went for 14 interviews, or about 14, and every single interview that I went to, they were using some kind of, or the company was using some kind of front-end framework, and React was used at most of those. So that just gives you some idea of how many jobs are out there and the credibility of the framework and who's using it. So let's talk about the back-end and front-end, just in case anybody's mixed up with this. I know my audience is full of Django developers. So back-end frameworks and front-end frameworks do not interfere with each other. They actually work well together. My favorite stack is actually Django on the back end and React on the front end. And when it comes to these, they handle two different parts, where a back-end framework would handle everything on the server side. So the server, building out the database, any kind of business logic, and creating an API, that would be done from the back end. Now, you would use a front-end framework if that's the route you decided to use to connect to a backend. So let me try to show you a quick picture here. So I have a couple of pictures here. These should have been in slides, but I didn't have that much time to prep here. So this right here would be some kind of JSON data from a backend. So we would prep the backend, we would make some data, and then we would turn it into a JSON format. And then in the front end, we would call that data using something like Fetch or Axios, and we would make a request. It would make an HTTP request, and we would get this data and then load it into our front end. So the backend would take care of everything right here, and the front end would take care of rendering that out and any logic on the front end. So that's how they work together. Don't mix them up. It's not React or Express or Node.js. It's usually one combined with another. So they work well together. So without a front-end framework, let's talk about how we would typically put together a website. So if it wasn't for a front-end framework, we would typically use some kind of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then we would work with a DOM, standing for the document object model, and we would interact with the website that way. So if we wanted things to update in the front end seamlessly, we would have to handle or write our code with just JavaScript. Now, this is okay for simple applications, but things can get really tough when we start writing a lot of JavaScript code, when that JavaScript code can get really complex. This is where a front-end framework can really help us. It really helps set this structure in place and shows us how to piece things together. So it gives us a more of a standardized format in how we do this. So I put out a video on this topic talking about when I use React, because I don't always use React or a front-end framework in every situation. There are some situations where the front end may be simple enough where I'm just displaying some data where I may not use a front-end framework. But when it comes to a more interactive user interface, that's where these frameworks really help. So that's why I would recommend something like this over trying to write all your own JavaScript code in the front end. Now, with React, at the heart of every React application are components here. So I'm going to pull up a couple of pictures here. So where we typically write our applications using the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, with React, using the Twitter skeleton here, we would build everything out inside of components. So how a React application is structured is we would typically build out every single component on its own, in its own file, completely separated from all the code. So in this case, our header file right here would be inside of its own file, and it would be a component completely on its own with its own HTML, with its own JavaScript, and it would be separate from everything else. And then we would build out a navigation component right here. Then we also have a sidebar, a feed component, maybe a tweet component, And we would grab all these components, or we will grab all these components when we're building our site, and we would put this into a parent component. So a page in React is actually a JavaScript component or a JavaScript class or function, which we'll get into in a second. So we build these components separately and we piece them together in one page. So it's going to be a little bit different from what we're used to. Now, components can be nested. So for example, in this tweet component, we have, this actually should be feed, that's a spelling error. So inside of this feed component, we can have a tweet component, and then in that tweet component, we can also have an author component, tweet content, actions, and so on. So we can layer on components into different components, and that's how we piece together an application. So what is a component now? So these actual components, how are we building them? So a component is simply a JavaScript class or function that returns back some HTML code. Now, for some of you that might already know what JSX is, this is actually JSX, which stands for JavaScript XML, but we'll get into that in a second. So let's say in our application, we're going to be writing notes. So that's what our application consists of. So we're going to create a function here. Class-based functions or class-based components are another way of doing things. In this tutorial, we're going to be doing function-based components or writing function-based components. So we create a function, we add in some HTML, maybe some kind of logic in here. We can get some data, add in some more functions inside of the body in the function, and then we just return that HTML, and that's it. So we would export this, and then we'd put this into another component or inside of a page. So that's what a component looks like. So when we're piecing together a page, it might look something like this. So we have a function or a home component. We see all the information to our home component. Then we take in the header component, the notes component, and the footer, and this would build our application and it would put it all together. So that's how we're piecing together our websites here. So all the code you're seeing right here is actually not HTML. I mentioned HTML here, and technically that is what we're going to be returning, but really what we are returning is JSX. So that stands for JavaScript XML. And this is a way of binding our HTML code and our JavaScript code together. So there's a few differences here. Once we're actually outputting this, this will be standard HTML, but the HTML looks like normal HTML here. So we have a div tag, we can see IDs. One thing that you might see a little bit different is the class here. We specify class name. That's because JavaScript already has the class keyword. So in JSX code, we can also write JavaScript-like syntax here. So with these curly braces, we can create a loop and output all of these divs right here. So this is how we're outputting our notes, for example. Now, right in here, we can actually pass in variables directly into our HTML code. So we add in the curly braces. That's what we're going to do in JSX. We add in the note variable, and that note will be displayed. Now, before this code actually does get put out into the browser technically can't read JSX, so this will be compiled into standard HTML and JavaScript. So that's what's going to be output, and this is what a user is going to be working with. So this is what we're going to build here. So let's talk about single page applications now. So with React, we are building out single page applications. So let's first talk about how websites are built normally without something like React. In React, we technically don't actually have to build out single applications, but that's what we typically use it for. So in a normal application, we have a couple of pages here. So we have a home.html. So when a user, let's say, goes to the home page of a website, they would make the request, and in the server, on the server side, we would find a template. We would render that template to the front end with some data, and that's what the user would see. Now, if the user happened to click on a profile, let's say this is a website that has some user accounts, we would send another request to the backend. We would get the profile template, the data associated with that profile, and bring it back. Now, if a user goes to the product page, the same cycle would go over. So we're dealing with multiple pages. So this is a multi-page application, and that's how we traditionally build websites. Now, with React, we are building out single page applications. And I really don't like the name single page applications because really it's more of a single template application. Facebook.com, for example, actually has multiple pages, but it's built in React. Now, Facebook has all these pages, but they're using a single page application. So how does this work? Well, in React, we are building out one main template. So we have an index.html traditionally, that's what it's going to be called, and we have a single template. Now, as the user navigates through the site, we're going to be clicking on different links or going to different parts of our website. And what's going to happen here is inside of this template, we are going to render out a page component. Now, when we go to a different page, what's happening here is we're not actually changing the template. We're never actually reloading the page. What we're doing here is we're taking out the current component. So whatever's in this frame right here, we would simply remove it and we would drag in another component, and that would be a page. So if we're on the home page, the home component would get thrown into index.html. If we're on the profile component, the profile would get rendered in, and then the product component. So now we're dealing with one template and we're rendering these out into the website here. So that is my introduction to React. Praveen, if you're watching the chat, if anything comes up there, I will let you ask a question. So just let me know. I will add you to the stream right now. So let's go ahead and move on to our environment structure. So we have our setup complete. And what I want to do now is first set up my environment. So I'm going to be using VS Code for my text editor. If you're using something else, that's absolutely fine. You might just have a different setup and you're probably going to work with the command prompt. So before we get started here, I want to give you my setup here. So VS Code, I'm going to be using the terminal. I really like it. And there are a couple of plugins that I want to, or extensions that I want to show you. So the first one is going to be Atom One Dark Pro. That is my theme here. So Atom One Dark Pro, if you want to install that and use the same theme, it's right here. Everybody always asks me for that. Also, there is a ES7 React Redux GraphQL snippets. So this is one of my favorite extensions here when it comes to building React applications, because I can write shortcuts here. So I can write a couple of commands here, and I'm going to get components built out, or basically boilerplate code for anything that I want. So for example, if I want to make an import, I want to make sure you can see this. What I'm going to do here is all I have to do is write an IMP, and it's going to give me this code. If I want to do IMD for a destructured component or import, it's going to give me that code simply by using the shortcut. So I would highly recommend you install that. And also when it comes to building out React components, we have our code right here. So if I want a React functional component, let's say I want to use this shortcut right here. So RAFCP, I think I spelled that wrong. There we go. So it's RAFCE. If I write in this code, I'm going to get all of this default code prepped for me. So instead of having to write all my components out by hand, I'm just going to get them prepped. And that's just going to auto-generate that code. Now, I do also have auto rename tag. This is another good one right here. So auto rename tag, basically, when we're working inside of that JSX or HTML, I can rename a tag here and that will automatically complete the closing tag. So you're going to see me edit code, and I'm not going to go back and forth to bold tags here. It's just going to fix that for me. Now, the last one here that I have right here, I think it's Prettier, is going to be the other one. If I have any other extensions installed that I forget about, I'll try to mention them. Prettier is nice. This means that every time I hit Control S or save, if my code is not formatted, my HTML code or JavaScript code, it's going to go ahead and auto format that for me. So this is really nice. It makes my code look a lot cleaner. So Prettier, we have the ES7 code snippets, auto rename tag, and we're using VS Code. Now, if you want the source code, go ahead and go to my GitHub account. I have this linked up in the video description. So go to the Notes app. This is the URL. Go ahead and just find that in the video description if you can't see that right there. And that will give you all the source code to the final version of this project. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at that, get it set up. I have instructions on how to clone it, how to set it up, and start that server so you can start testing it right away. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next section here. So we have our environment set up, and what I want to do now is start working with our React application. So before you start working with React, you are going to need to install Node.js. So you could just go to nodejs.org or just do a quick search in any search engine. Make sure you install it. I typically like to install the LTS version of that. That's going to give me the safer version. Sorry if you hear the outside noise. There's a car alarm going off. Praveen, is that distracting?
No.
You don't hear it? Okay, good. Okay, so make sure you have Node.js installed first. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to go through this process. And now we can go ahead and set up our application. So because we needed Node.js installed for NPM, that stands for Node Package Manager. So we need to be able to install packages, and we need npx, which is a way to execute these commands. So that's why we need a Node.js installed. It's going to give us access to React. And from your VS Code terminal or your command prompt, whatever you're using, go ahead and CD into the file that you are going to be building your project in, or the folder. So in my case, I'm going to be working from my desktop, and I'm actually going to do this from VS Code. So CD into the place where you want your folder or your project, and go ahead and do npx create-react-app. So once you have that, then go ahead and specify your project name. So we're just going to go ahead and go to the right here, and I'm going to call it my notes. So I'm actually going to execute this from my VS Code terminal. I just wanted to show anybody that doesn't have that. So for your terminal, you could just go to terminal here, do new terminal, or just do Control-tilde. That's the top left of your keyboard, and that should set this up. So I'm going to CD into my desktop, and let's just do npx create-react-app. So this is going to give me the boilerplate file. So we'll just do my notes here, and we're going to hit enter. So this should take about maybe a minute to 2 minutes to install. I thought about doing this before the stream and then just showing you how to take care of this, but I might as well do it all live right now so you can see everything. So this is going to take some time. Let's see the chat here while this is getting ready. Are you sure you don't see that car alarm, or you don't hear it?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Oh, that's so annoying. I really hope they stop.
That
all right.
was really annoying. You were explaining, so I didn't disturb.
Oh, it distracted you?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so that's just getting it set up right now. Remember, that's npx, not npm here. Okay, so for some reason my chat won't let me go to the latest one. Oh, I see Shiva's in the chat. No, as long as the car is not mine. Yeah, it's not my car. At least I don't think so. There we go. Now it's off. All right. Yeah, in the tutorial on Udemy, I just somebody did pip install Django. I typically just skip this. I just skip this part, fast forward it, but live, well, we're gonna have to see everything. Alarm is annoying. Yeah, sorry about that. This is what happens live. So some people are not hearing it. Okay. All right. So how's the music, by the way? Is that distracting? Can you hear it? Anybody hear that?
Yeah, I can't hear it.
You can't hear the music?
No.
So here's my preference in music, by the way. So while we're waiting for that, I typically do just this lo-fi music right here. I always code to this. And for now, I will turn it up, see if you can hear it. I never do lyrics. It's nice and calming and just kind of keeps me focused. So if you look in the recommended section, it's usually this kind of calm lo-fi music. I absolutely love it. And also, while we're still installing, check out Praveen's channel, Coding Vampire Praveen right here. He is starting to put together some awesome Django stuff. I love his work. Yeah, this is going to be fully available. Remember that the Udemy link is down in the video description before. In the first 3 days, so from now until 3 days after this, that course is going to be completely free. If you click on it, that's going to be it's going to give you access to the free version of it. So you're going to get the coupon code. You can get it for free. So get it now. And this stream will also be posted. So will that course. The whole purpose of this stream is to just do something a little bit different, and maybe give you a different perspective on things, and to be able to actually ask some questions. So our React application is officially installed. So right away we see some commands here. npm star is how we can start our server. This is how we CD into the project, and we have access to a command called run build. So let's go ahead and take care of this. So the first thing I want to do is, now that I have this installed, so if you're using the VS or the command prompt here, CD into your project. So if you called it my notes, go ahead and CD into it. Now I'm going to close this out. So if you're on VS Code, go ahead and just open up the project file. So go to whatever you name the project. In my case, it's my notes. And I'm going to open up my terminal by doing Control-tilde. And now I am in my React project. So at this point, I can just do npm start. So that's going to turn on my development server. Now there's another command that we're going to get to later on. I just realized my demo project is actually running on that terminal. So I have to turn that off right now. Okay, so we're going to run it one more time. So npm start is going to open up my browser right now. It's going to open up my React application on port 3000. So by default, it opened it up. We can see it right here. And this is my project now. So we'll give that a second to load, and here we go. So this is the default application that React gives us. Now, when it comes to deploying our application, we're gonna run npm run build, which is gonna give us an optimized version of this project. So it's basically gonna bundle up all my project files, all the code that I write, and it's gonna turn them into static assets, and then those are the files that we would deploy, but we're not gonna do that till the end. For now, we're gonna work inside of our development environment. So let's go ahead and talk about all the boilerplate code that we have. My server is still going to be on. I'm just going to minimize it, and let's go over this. So the first thing is node modules. We're not going to touch this. This is all the installed packages that we have in React. So this is React itself included in that, any packages that come with it. So we're not going to work with that. Leave that alone there. Now, public, this is where we have that index.html file that's going to represent that single template in our project. So I'm going to take out some notes here. So public contains our index.html, that single page that I referred to, and this also contains any assets that come with it. So any logos, any kind of favicons that we're going to be using, this is that project. Now, this div right here with the ID of root, this is where that page component will be loaded into and then torn down from. So just remember, public contains our index.html and the static assets that come with it. Now, we're going to get to source in a second, but we have our README, the gitignore, package.json. We'll focus on the more important ones here. So package.json is like the settings configuration file of my project. So this is where we have the project name, any scripts that we want to add to it, and so on. Package.json is very important. It contains our project configuration. So now our entire project is going to be inside of source. This is the main folder that we're going to be working within. So if I go to app.js, this is like the core file to my application. So if you see this right here, so the logo, and we have these links right here, this is all written inside of app.js. So if I actually move this over, let's try to minimize this really quick. I'm really zoomed in, so it's a little bit harder to do this. So we have app.js opened up, and if I make an edit here, let me just remove that. So let's say I want to take out this edit word right here. So if I take that out and then hit save, so I can do Control S, it's going to hot refresh or hot reload my application. So we can see that we can actually edit the entire application at this point from app.js. So if I want to take out, let's say, this logo right here, I can remove that, save it, and we can see that update. So let's go ahead and just remove everything from this main div right here, and let's just say my project, and we're going to save that. So once I save that, here is all my code right here. It's all cleared out. This is my main application, or the core of my application. So we'll go back to some other files, and then I'll get back to how this is structured. So inside of source, what we're going to do here is we are going to only keep 3 different files here. So I'm going to get rid of everything else. It doesn't mean they're not important. They're just not important for what we're doing right now. So I want to keep this as clean as possible. So let's go ahead and remove setup test.js. We don't need that right now. We also don't need web vitals right now. So if I save these and remove them, I'm automatically going to get an error. So don't worry about this. In React, you're going to see the error right away. Because there's hot reloading, we're going to see the error. So we just got rid of that file. We're also going to get rid of app test.js. And we also don't need index.css. Praveen, how is the music? Is that distracting?
I can't listen.
Okay, good. Okay, so we also have our logo. We're going to get rid of that. And now all we have is app.css, app.js, and index.js. So we have that error because of web vitals right here. We deleted the file and then we imported it. So we don't need that. That's going to cause it. We also don't have index.css. We're getting rid of that. So let's go ahead and save it. And in app.js, let's go ahead and remove the logo import. So if I save all of this and also get rid of all my CSS code, so this is going to be the main file that contains all the CSS code. It's imported right here. So by default, that style will apply. So we'll just go ahead and get rid of all of this. And now we have a clean source folder. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh that just in case. And there we go. So our project is now empty, and that's all we get at this point. So what I'm going to do at this point now is start building things out. So remember I talked about components. So we're going to have 2 different types of components. We're going to have components that are different parts of our page, and we're going to have components that represent different pages. So at this point, we're going to have one page, and that's just going to be app.js. So we're going to create some components and add it to it. So inside of the source folder, we're going to create a folder called components. And let's go ahead and create our first component. So I'm going to do new file here, and I'm going to call this first component header.js. So all our components are going to be JavaScript files. So just add in the .js extension. Now to create a component, there's different ways we can do this. We can use the function keyword and we can create a component that way. I'm going to use arrow functions, and that's what we're going to stick to here. So we're going to create a component. In this case, I'm going to call it header. I'm going to name it the same as the file, and I like to call the first, or have the first letter of the word as a capital letter. Now we're going to create the component here. So we'll do header is equal to the arrow function. And then we simply just need to return some HTML code or some JSX. So we're going to create a div right here, and we'll just say h1, and we'll just do my header. So we'll save that. Then we need to export the component. So we'll just do export default, and then we're going to specify the component that's going to be the default export, and that is going to be our header. So now that we export the component, I talked about building our components, exporting them, and then bringing them into our application. So let's go into app.js here. So we'll close out index.html. Don't need that at this point. And inside of app.js, if you look at the file structure, app.js sits outside of this components folder. So it's going to be the root component. So we're going to keep it there. And let's go ahead and import our next component. In fact, I'll do that just underneath my CSS. I'm going to do import. At this point, I won't use a shortcode until I do this once through. So we're going to import our header component from, and then we're going to do this in quotes. We're going to go into ./components. So we're going into the components folder. We're going in here, and then we're going into header, into the header.js file. So we're going into this file and we're grabbing this component that was exported. Okay, so let's make sure everything's saved. And now in order to bring this component into our application, it's going to look like HTML code. So all we have to do is add in the component with the /, and that's it. So if I go into my application, we see our header. So really quick, I'm going to build out 2 more components just to kind of run through this a couple of times. We'll go into the components folder, and we're going to create a body.js file. And if you're using VS Code and you have that ES7 code snippets extension, we can do React arrow function component exported. So that's the code snippet. We'll hit enter, and we get all the boilerplate without having to write this out. So it makes it a little bit quicker. So let's just go ahead and do H3, and we will do body here. After 3 days, the course will not be removed. I see somebody asking that in the chat. It's just going to be at the normal price. And with Udemy, it's always going to be like $10 or $14. Okay, so we have the body component. Let's go ahead and bring that in. So we're going to import the next component. In this case, I'm going to use a shortcut, and that's going to be IMP. And then I hit enter. And now I can just get that code auto-generated for me. We'll go into the components file, and we'll go into body now, not the header. Okay, so let's go body here, and let's bring that in. So we'll add in the next component. So I hope you're seeing how the page is being put together now. We have one page here, and we're simply building out components separately and adding them together. Now they're not too complex, so you're going to see the benefit in a little bit, but that's going to show us how to piece it together. Now for the footer, we'll just do footer.js. You know what? I'm not going to build out the footer. I did that in the tutorial, and you kind of get the point. I was just going to add in another component here. So let's move on to, actually, I did want to address a few things here. So we're about to move on to adding pages here. But before that, I want to talk about components here. So let's say we have our header component. There's a couple of rules here. If I remember any along the way, I will bring them up here. But the first thing is that each component has to be wrapped inside of a parent right here. So we have a div, so we can't do something like this. So let's say we wanted to just add another div in here and say this is going to be a part of our, or a different part of our header component. This will not work. If I hit save, this is going to throw in an error automatically. So what has to happen here is, regardless of what we're doing, we always need one parent div. So if I wanted to add that, I would add in another div, but it always has to be wrapped inside of a main one. So always remember to return a single div before you add in any other content into that component. Now, we also have something called fragments. So we don't always have to have divs. So we could actually, let's go to the body component. We could actually just remove that div right there and just have a fragment, and that will work. As long as it's wrapping the component, that will work. It doesn't always have to be a div. So 2 things that I can remember right now. I left the header as a div because I am going to add a class name. So I actually do need that to be a real div. So let's move on to the next section, and we're going to talk about adding pages. So our pages will actually be components, but I want to keep my components that represent pages in a different file here. So what I'm going to do here is go into the source folder, and I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call this pages. So this will hold all my pages component. So in the pages folder, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this notes list page.js. In the course, in the Udemy course, I called it notes list, and that kind of, or just notes page, and that kind of gave us an issue because our note page is also going to be called note page. So the only difference is that S there. So in this case, we'll just call it notes list. So I'm going to do React arrow function component exported. We're going to use a shortcut again. And for anybody that doesn't know how this works, basically whatever you name the file, that's what the component is going to be named. So that's where it generates its name from if you're using that shortcode. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this. So we'll just do notes here. Won't add anything there. We'll just get that component in here. And let's go ahead and actually get rid of our body component. So we're going to delete that. And let's go into app.js. We're going to change body for notes list page. And we're going to change this import. So I'm going to copy and paste that and make sure we don't have body anymore. Okay, so I might need to do a hard refresh. Let's see, notes list page is not working. Okay, so the issue here is that is actually in the pages folder, not in the components folder. So we have to make sure we're paying attention to the file structure. So now that I got rid of that, the error should go away. So we have our notes and we have our header. Okay, so before we actually add in the pages, I want to actually render some data out. So inside of the demo, let's go to the notes app here, or we'll close that out. I actually have two browsers open, so I'm going to open this up here. Let's go ahead and go into the GitHub repo. You could write all this out by hand, but I also have this inside of a folder called assets, and we can go to data.js. So here is some JavaScript code that we can actually work with here. We're going to take this JavaScript code, we're going to copy it, and here we have three nodes with an ID, with a body, and then a value of updated. We're actually going to get rid of created there. So let's just copy this or write it out by hand. So when I paste this in, I'll give you a second to look at that. If you want to write it all out, you can add your own notes for the body. And let's go ahead and go back into our project, and we'll create a new folder called assets. That's going to be our new folder. And inside of assets, we're going to create a file called data.js. Okay, so I'm going to paste that in, and I'm just going to get rid of created. We're actually not going to use that. That is going to be in the Django version of this project when I build that out. So I will probably stream that too. Okay, so we have our fake data file, and we're going to start working with that. So let's go ahead and go into our notes list, and I want to show you how to render things out and actually how to use variables inside of JSX and render code. So inside of our notes list page, let's go ahead and import that. So we'll just go ahead and make a quick import. We're going to do IMP, and we're going to go into assets. So we have to go back two files. So we're going to do ... We're inside of the pages folder, so we have to do ... and then we'll do assets, and we'll just do data. And from data, we exported notes. So we exported notes at the very end, and now we want to work with that. So this is where notes are exported. And at this point, I actually have access to these notes inside of this file. So let's go ahead and render that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a div here, and this is going to be my notes list. So we'll add in a class here. Later on, we're going to style this. So we're just going to call this notes list. I believe that's the name that I wanted to stick with. Just wanted to clarify that or make sure that that's right. Yeah, so notes list is what I want to do. So inside of my code, I can actually write some logic out inside of the HTML here. So we're just going to do notes.map. So we're going to map through, and on each iteration, we're going to get the note, and then we're going to use an arrow function. And we are simply going to render each note here. So let's just add in a paragraph tag, and we can add in a variable with the curly brace again, and we'll just say note.body. So that's how we can access the attributes. And if I go to my page now, I should be able to see the notes outputted. So we imported some notes, and we outported the notes, or we rendered the notes inside of our page. So I hope that's making sense at this point. So What I want to do now is actually use a component for every single list item. So you see how I'm rendering out our notes here, and I'm just rendering out a paragraph tag. Well, later on, we're going to have a header, we're going to have a date like you saw in that demo, and then a body, and there's going to be some logic that needs to go with this. So because that logic is going to be contained inside of the list item, I want to make that its own component and not have to write all that in here. And we'll see why that's an advantage later. So at this point, we're going back into the components folder. Inside of components, I'm going to create another component called list item. So list item.js. And let's go ahead and create the actual component. So React arrow function component exported. We have our list item, and let's go ahead and build this out. So our list item, let's see, what do we want to do in here? So we're going to go ahead and pass in a note into the list item. So we'll just go ahead and do H3, and for now, let's do list item. Then let's bring that into our notes list page. We'll import that component. So IMP, we're going into components, and we're going into list item. So we're going to talk about a concept called props right now in a second. So list item, let's get that imported. And let's bring that in. So on each iteration, we're just going to go ahead and output, or we're going to output list item, close that off, and let's take a look. So we have 3 list items. At this point, we don't have any data in them. So what we need to do, because we're rendering out the list item here, we need a way to access the actual note here. So on each iteration, we have a note here. We need to be able to actually render that out inside of that list item. So we need to pass that data down as a parent to a child. So there is something called props here that we're going to work with. So we're going to work with 2 different data types or structures. I'm not sure what's the proper way of saying that. So we have props, which is basically an immutable form of data, which means that we can't actually modify it once we pass it down, and state is data that we can actually update. We'll get to that later. So because this is a function, props are going to act as properties or parameters that we can pass down to a child component. So just like a function where you pass in a parameter, we can do that here. And at this point, what I want to do is just console out our props here. So we'll just do props. I want to show you what this looks like. At this point, it's just going to be an object with no data in it. So if I save this, let's go ahead and go into inspect, and let's go into the console. So 3 times we see props being output here. So we'll fix this in a second. So on each iteration, we're running console.log. We see props. I just outputted a string here. And what is props itself here? So what that is simply an object. So we can actually pass data down. So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, I'm going to fix this little issue here. So that error that's coming up. So inside of list item, because we're mapping through our items here, we need to add in a key prop. That's what the error is telling us. And a key prop is basically a way that we can identify list items for the virtual DOM. So anytime we're updating an item, instead of updating every single item inside of our DOM, which is the website, everything that you're seeing, we are able to update a single item. So the key prop is going to give us a way to actually identify that. So outside of our note, let's quickly just wrap this inside of parentheses, and let's just get the index on each iteration of that loop, and we'll pass that in. So it's going to start from 0, and it's just going to keep incrementing, and it's going to have the key prop here. So if I save that, we should see that error go away. Okay, so that error is not there anymore. And now we want to pass in the actual note object. So what we can do, this is going to work like an HTML property, where you can actually add in data dash and then specify a specific property, or as a function parameter. So let's go ahead and add in note, and we'll set that to equals. And in curly braces here, or in the curly braces, we're going to add in the note object. So basically, we're setting a key value pair, and we're saying pass in this note object to the child and access it by this name. So whatever we called it right here is how we can access that note object. So I'm going to save that, and let's take a look at what our props say now. So if I refresh that, here we go. We have our object, and inside of that, we see another object, which is our note. And on each iteration, we're printing out the actual object. So to actually access this inside of the child, let's go back to the notes or the list item component. And let's just go ahead and do this. We can do props.note dot body. So we can go into the props object, grab the object that we want to get, so the note, and then get the body. So if I save that, here we go. We see each note being output by accessing the props here. So that's how we're able to get that. Now, another shortcut, this is actually how I'm going to use it from now on. I don't want to use props. What I can do is actually destructure this JavaScript object. So if you don't know what that concept is, look that up on YouTube. There's a lot of good videos on that. But basically, we can take apart the object and access different parts of it just by doing something like this. We add the curly brace, and then we specify the note. So that's the prop that we want to get. So now we can access the note directly. So we'll take out that console log, and now we just have note.body. So we passed it down from the note list, we passed it down here, and we destructured it and output that here. So I'm going to get the same thing, and there we go. Okay, so at this point, I want to actually create another page here. So to actually create these pages, we are going to work with something called a React router. So because it's inside of a single page application, we're not technically switching out different templates or going to different pages. We're simply changing the component, and React router is what's going to allow us to do this inside of React here. So the first thing I want to do here is create another page. So we'll go to pages and let's add in a new component, and this will be called note page.js. So we have notes list and note page. So we'll do React arrow function component exported, RAFCE. We have the note, and let's just go ahead and do H1, and we'll just say this is a single note page. Okay, how are we doing, Praveen? Any major things that I'm missing? Good questions?
That is having fun.
Okay.
There was one question one or two people asked, I think. They were asking, like, what is the difference between NPM and yarn?
That's just a different way to work with node packages, I believe. I never use yarn. It's just a different way to do it, I believe. I'm not sure of the actual differences between that, though. So, yeah, sorry about that answer. Okay, so we have our note page.
Sorry to disturb you. I'll take leave for 10 minutes. I'll be back.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. All right, so we have our note page, and we want to actually use this page, and we need to use it inside of app.js. So we built out the page, and I'm going to quickly import that. So we're just going to go into pages here. So we'll do / pages, and we're going into note page, and we're importing that. So note page. So the issue at this point is that we have a single page here, and we need that router to actually work with it, because if we add the note page here, so let's say I just wanted to add in that component, well, it's not going to do anything. All we're going to do is add in another component into our single page. So we don't want this. So we have our single page, but it's technically not even a page at this point. So we want to change this up. So let's go ahead and import React router. So I'm going to do a quick search for this. We'll just do React router DOM. So I'm going to do a Google search for that. And this is the package that we're going to work with. So the first thing is we need to install it. So this is a third-party package. So make sure you install that. I'm just going to copy this. We will paste that in here. So if you're working from the command prompt, just open up another one, or just turn off your server, install it, and then turn it back on. In my case, I'm just going to open up another terminal. So I never turned off the actual server. So npm install React router DOM. Okay, so give that a second, and let's go back to the documentation. So to actually work with it, we need to import from React router DOM, and we have different things that we can actually import. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this and then follow the documentation and how to add it. So in this case, we make these imports, and then we wrap our root component, the app.js component there, and we're going to wrap it inside of a router. So the import should be done here. Let's go ahead and minimize that, and we'll make this import. So I'm going to import that at the top of app.js. And at this point, I'm not going to work with link, and I'm also not going to work with switch. So we are going to use the browser router, which is imported as router, and then a specific route. So here's what's going to happen here. So let's go ahead and wrap the entire component inside of a router. So we'll just do router. We'll close that up here. Put that at the closing tag there, and there we go. So at this point, nothing's going to change. Now, our components are rendered out just like that. We pass them in, and they get rendered out. Now, what we're going to do here is, instead of rendering out the notes list like that, we are going to change this to a route. So we imported the router and a route. So with this route, we specify the page that we want to set this to. So we're going to set the path here. So the first path is going to be set to the home page. So that's just going to be a quote and a forward slash. Then we want to set something called exact, which I'll get to in a second. And then we specify the component. So instead of just passing the component in, we need to specify the component that we want to render whenever this is the path. So I hope that makes sense. We specify the path and then the component that should be rendered out with it, or in this case, the page. So we specify the component. Now we pass in the notes list page like that. So at this point, everything should be working. So if I go to the home page right now, let's see. Router. What's going on here? For some reason, that is not actually showing. Oh, I said router, so that should be route. So we're specifying a specific route. Okay, there we go. So here we go. So I am on the home page. I see the notes page. And then if I go to forward slash anything else, it's not going to show up. Only our header is showing. Now, the reason why I'm leaving the header outside right here is because I want that to be on every page. So in this case, that's going to make up a component that appears on every page. Now, to actually make a notes page, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to specify a route, not router, but route. We're going to specify the path here. The path in this case is going to be forward slash and then note. And we're going to make this URL dynamic here in a second. Then we need to specify the component. And the component is going to be the note page. And then we close that off. So now what I do here, or what I can do, is actually go to the note page. So we go to note. Here we go. So we have multiple pages inside of our application. If I go back to notes or the home page here we have the home page. So in this case, we had to add exact for a specific reason. So what's happening here is we have this forward slash. Now, technically, every single page on the website starts with a forward slash. So if I take this out, what's going to happen here is the route is going to think that we need to render out the notes list page on every single page because every page starts with that route. So if I don't specify exact, on the home page, I'm fine. But if I go to a specific note, look what happens. Now I get the note page, but I also get the notes list. So that's what exact takes care of for us. So make sure you specify that and that will fix the issue. So somebody just asked, what does that do? So what does the keyword exact component do? Or what does that do in the component? It makes sure that that is the only route that this component will render in because sometimes there are dynamic routes and I'll show you that in a second. So at this point, when we go to a note, how do we want to get a note rendered out in a single page? So let's say we are on the note page. Well, we want to be able to click on a specific note. Then we want to go to that note page. How do we do that? Well, when we click on a note, what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass in an ID that goes with it. So we're going to pass in an ID inside of a link, and then that's how we're going to query that specific note is by its ID. So in this case, I need to add in a dynamic parameter because we don't know how to get that. So we're going to add in a colon, and then we're going to add in a parameter. In this case, I can name this whatever I want. I could call it no ID. It really doesn't matter. Just go ahead and call it ID. So that means that this parameter now is dynamic. So what I can do here is I can actually go to /note, and then at this point, it's not going to do anything. So I need to add in a dynamic parameter. So I add 1, I add 3 here. So the page is going to be the same. That just means that this parameter has to be there, but it can be whatever we want it to be. So it's dynamic. So now I can actually go to the note page. So let's go to the note page. And at this point, the router that we added gave us another object. So it added in more props here. So let's go ahead and do this. So we'll just go to props here to the note page and let's print out our props. So remember originally we had an empty object. Well, now our props have another object. So let's just go ahead and look this up here. If I go into inspect here, if I go to console, we see this object for our props. We got this object here, and this is what the router gave us. So it gave us this object with some information about our URL. So we have something like history, which tells us or gives us all these different methods. It tells us where we're currently at. We see location, which tells us what's the current path name. So we can see note 3. If I change that, I can go to note 2 and so on. So it's given us all this information about our URL. And the one we're going to work with is this object called match. So we have an object inside of an object, and we're going to work with match. So the reason why we want to work with match is because we need to get that note ID inside of our page in order to actually query the database or whatever data that we have. So see match right here, and then params, and then ID, whatever we called this right here. Let's go ahead and get that. So we can go into props, we'll go into match here, and then we can go into ID. So props.match, actually we need to do .params. So these are the parameters, and we should be able to see that now. So now as I change the page, I can add in any ID there, and we're seeing that be output. So there's a specific reason why we needed to do that. So at this point, let's go ahead and get that. So what I'm going to do here is, instead of using props, I'm actually going to destructure the match object, and we're just going to go ahead and set a variable, and we're going to call this note ID, and we're going into match now. So we don't have to do props because we destructured match. We're just going into match.params.id. So that is now going to be our note ID. So let's make sure we got that successfully, and let's console that out. Okay, so there we go. We see that ID. So at this point, we are simply working with a JSON file. So actually, before we're getting that data, or before we get that data, let's actually link to it. So I want to be able to click on these list items and actually go to the pages. So with our React router, we saw something called link. And I removed that from the app page because we're not using it in this page. But inside of the notes list page, let's go ahead and, actually that's not in the notes list, it's going to be in the component of list item. So let's go ahead and import something. So we're going to do from react-router-dom. We are going to import link. So link is going to be a lot like the A tag that you see inside of basic HTML. So we're basically using React's version of it. So in this case, what I'm going to do is wrap this inside of a link here. So I changed the div to a link. I don't know why the closing one didn't finish. And instead of specifying href like we normally would, we're just going to do to. So that's what it's going to do for us. We specify that path of where we're going to. And in this case, I'm going to use the backticks here. So we're going to use template literals. So I'm going to do /note, and then we're going into note ID. So we're adding in a dollar symbol and a curly brace. This is template literals. It allows us to write variables and JavaScript logic inside of our HTML. If we use the backticks right here, those aren't regular quotes. And we're just going to do note.id. So inside of every single list item that gets rendered out here, we are adding in a link that wraps the entire body, and we're specifying the path to note, and then we're passing in the ID. So if I go back to this page, I can go to each note here, and we're seeing that ID change right here. So if I go to the first one, we're seeing the ID of 1. If I go to the second one, that keeps changing. Now, what if I want to render this data out? So we are going to talk about hooks here. I see somebody asking about hooks. So what if I want to actually render that data out? So we'll go to the notes page, and at this point, we're just going to access that JSON file that we have. And later on, we're actually going to make an API call to the database. So we'll go to the note page. I'm going to keep trying to keep my tabs clean here. So let's go ahead and make a quick import. So we'll just do an import. We want to import all those assets. So we'll just make that import, and we'll go into assets/data, and we're going to import notes. So we have our note ID. So in this case, we're going to get the note, and this is simply going to search through the data file that we have. So we're going to search through this, and we're going to find a note by the ID. So let's go ahead and find that. Okay, so Praveen is back here, so I just added him to the stream. So we're going to set the variable of note, and then we're going into notes. So that's going to be notes, not note. So we imported that. Now we're going into notes, and we're going to note.find. And we're just going to grab the note on each iteration. We're using an arrow function, and we're just going to match the note ID to the, let's see, we're going to match the note ID to that parameter that we passed in. So we're going to do note.id on each iteration, and we're just going to make sure that this matches the note ID like this. Now, just to make sure, I want to make sure the note ID is a number, because that could give us an error if we're doing triple equals to, and there we go. Okay, so this should give us that specific note object on each iteration. So we'll take this note, and all we need to do now is we'll change this to a paragraph tag and we'll pass that in here. So note.body. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. We imported all the notes. We used the note ID. We ran a filter. We found a specific note that matches that ID, and we rendered that in the body. So if I go back here, let's go ahead and go to the first note. Let's go back to our page. If I go to this one, we can see it. If I go to wash car, now that note is being rendered out. But what happens if I go to a note that doesn't exist? If I add in an ID that doesn't exist? Well, automatically we're going to get an error, and it says that it can't find the body property of whatever we're looking for. Now, just to not throw this error, I'm going to add in a question mark before that dot syntax right there, and that's going to make sure that error doesn't occur. I'll find a different way to work with that error handling, but for now, I don't want it to throw the error. I just want it to do nothing. Okay, so 1 second. Let me turn on my fan. It's getting a little bit hot in here. Okay, so we rendered out a single no object, and what do we need to do at this point? Okay, we have that taken care of, and what I want to do now is actually style my website here. So we're going to add some styling. I have some pre-built CSS for this already, so we're just going to import this, and then I'm going to go as slow as possible through that CSS file and update all of our code to make sure that you can see it. I didn't want to spend time working on CSS inside of a React tutorial. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going into our GitHub repo. So again, that's in the link down in the description. Go ahead and go into app.css, and we are going to import everything. So we have a Google font imported. We have some variables or some variables set inside of CSS, and then all of the styling that goes with it. So we're going to copy all of that, and let's go ahead and go into app.css. So we'll paste all of that in here. For anybody that wants to follow along, we have that import here if you want to write all that out. Just want to make sure everybody can see the code. We have our CSS variables. Now there is a light and dark theme that goes with it. Thanks to my designer, Sharir Shuvo, he built this out for me. So to switch the theme is going to be very easy. I'll show you how to do that. So we have the default variables, and then we have dark mode. Now down here, we have all the base configuration for our application. Basic configuration for our body tags, our links. We have our container, our app container, our app header. We'll just go slow through this. I know some people want to write all this out by hand. So if I'm going too fast, pause it wherever you need. And this will take a couple more seconds. Okay, so styling for different parts, we'll keep referring to it. Okay, so that's our CSS file. So if I save this, we're going to see some styling be applied right away. So if I go back here, we see the font change up a little bit, and that's it at this point. So let's go ahead and actually build this out. So we'll spend a minute fixing all of this. So we'll keep the CSS file open, and we are going to start with app.js. So we'll go into app.js. This will be, I guess, a little bit more of a relaxing time because we are able to do stuff that's not React and just style things. So we'll add in our container. Let's go ahead and go into this section. Let's add in another div here. I am looking at some source code from the original project I built out. And let's add in another div. And this is going to wrap our app here. So this is going to center the actual component here. So we'll just do app. And if I take a look at this, now things should be centered. So everything's inside like this now. So if you look at the CSS, inside of our container here, we set the background colors, and then we actually set the max width of 480. We set a height to it and made sure all of that was centered. So the next thing I want to do is go to the list part. So we'll go into notes list. So we'll close out app.js, and we'll go into notes list. So inside of notes list, what I want to do first is wrap the entire component inside of a class called notes. So remember, it's class name, not just class. Now, for the actual notes here, we are going to have a header. So we'll create a div here, and we are going to set the class name to notes header. So notes dash header. And then inside of that header, I want a title, and I also want the count of how many notes that we have. So we're going to create an h2 tag. This h2 tag is going to have the class name of notes title, notes dash title. And for this, I am actually going to use some HTML code. So this is going to give us like an icon. So we're going to use the and symbol, pound symbol, 9782, and then semicolon. And then we're just going to say notes. So if I save that, this is what it's going to look like. So it gives us that symbol right there with notes here, and we'll fix that header later. So the CSS to that here, let's see, we'll go into our notes header. This is where we're getting the color. So we're actually coloring any buttons in there and any actual text. So that's our notes list. Then we have the list itself. So that looks good. Let's just add in a count here. So we'll add in a paragraph tag, and we're just going to go into notes. So we're going to do a variable there, notes.length. And I'm going to give that a class name. And this is going to be set to notes-count. Okay, so as we update our notes, the current count will always be right there. So we're just getting the length of the list. And the next thing I want to do is actually style the list items here. So we'll go into list item, and that's going to be right here for the list item. Let's see. So for this, I'm just going to wrap this all inside of a div right now. So we'll just do div. Whoops, what did I do there? So we're going to create a div, close that off, and let's just add in the note body inside of this div. Throw that in right here. And for the div, we're just going to give this a class name of notes list item. So I'm not using any specific theme. My designer actually built this out for me, so Sharir Shuvo, and I'm just using his template. You can have it. It's all in the GitHub repo. So note list item here. So that's going to give me these notes items. Now I want to work inside of my dark theme here. So let's go ahead and actually set that at this point. So we'll go into my app.js file. And in order to work with these dark variables right here for the dark theme, all you need to do is add in the class of dark. So we'll just do dark. I know a lot of people like this. I personally prefer this. And now it looks like that. So much cleaner. So let's go into the single note. We have a few things to fix up here. So we actually have a text area. The CSS took care of that for us. Or we don't have the text area, but we're about to add it. And the CSS will style that for us. So we'll go into the note page. And in this page, let's see. So we're going into note page. Let's go ahead and give this a class here of note. So we'll do note like that. And then we do need a header. I hope these streams are fun. I'm trying to engage with the audience as much as possible, along with keeping the stream focused. So definitely a fun thing that I'm trying. I really like this. I'm having fun, at least for now. So we'll see. Maybe I can find different ideas and ways of making this more interactive. Okay, so inside of our note header, we have our main container, and we need to add in an h3 tag. So this is how Sharir actually designed it. So I'm following his design principles. So in here, what we're going to do is import a link. So we're going to import a link from react-router-dom. And let's add in a link. And inside of the h3 tag, we are adding in the link. So that's the React router link. And this link is simply going to be a backlink. So we'll just do to. And this is going to send us back to the home page. So we're going back to the home page. And let's see. In here, what we're going to use is an icon that we're actually going to import here. So let's go ahead and actually bring this in. So inside of the source code, there is an icon here. So on GitHub here, inside of assets, there is an icon called arrowleft.svg. You can also go to Mumble UI and then just go ahead and search for arrow, and this should give you this arrow left icon. So go ahead and click on that, download it, and that should bring it in. So we're going to bring that into our assets folder. So we want the icon, and I'm just going to call this arrow-left. So from the GitHub repo, or just go to mumbleui.com. So in order to actually use this icon, we're going back to the note page. Sorry for all the boilerplate here, but I want to go slow through the styling because I know some people get annoyed when that's skipped through pretty fast, even though we did skip through a lot. So we're going into assets, and then we're going into arrow-left. So we're bringing in that SVG file. Okay, and one thing we're going to do here, this is something really cool in React. I can actually bring this icon in as a component. So instead of just bringing in the SVG file in here, what I'm going to do is say import, and then we're going to do React component. So React component, and then we're just going to do as arrow left. So we can name it whatever we want. I'm going to call it arrow left. So now this icon can be used as a component. So that's why I imported that. I just wanted to bring that in right here. And there we go. So that's going to bring in the icon, and we can actually make sure that has some styling. So we have the note header. Let's see what that looks like. So as we go to a specific note, we have that back icon. So I can click on these and go back. So that's what we just added. Let me just close this out right here. Okay, so for the actual note here, we need a text area. So I want to be able to edit that. I'm not just trying to display a note. So at this point, underneath here, we're going to remove the note body, and we're just going to do text area. Close that off here, and we are just going to set the value to the note body. So we'll just do value, and this will be note, and then a question mark because we want to make sure that it exists first, and then we'll do body. So if I look at this, here we go. Now that is a text area. Now there is one thing about this. I will not be able to actually edit this, and I believe we are going to see an error. So in React, the one thing is when we're working with form fields, we need to add in an onChange event and be able to actually update this form as we type things. So if I type things right now, I'm typing, nothing's going to be updated. So we're just making sure that, or this error is telling me that we need to add in that onChange event, which we'll do later. But for now, we just wanted to add in that text field. So I think that's it for the styling. We styled the page and we styled this section. Actually, we still have the header left. So let's go back to the header. Let's make sure that looks nice. So in the header, we're just going to give this a class name of app header. So we'll just do equals app-header, and we'll just do notes list. Give it a title. So notes. Okay, so there we go. Much better. The application is looking good. So we want to add in some functionality here. So here's what we're going to do at this point. We want to work with some kind of backend. So typically we would have a backend using Node.js and Express, or Python and Django, PHP and Laravel, or whatever. We'd have some kind of API and we would connect to that. Now, because I don't want to spend time working with setting up an API right now, we'll do that in another stream or video. I want to work with some kind of dummy API so I can still send data, make these requests, but do this much quicker than having to set up a full backend. So for this, we are going to use something called JSON server. JSON server is going to help us take care of this, and it's going to make, or it's going to replicate an API. So it's the mock API that's going to make this really quick. So let's just go ahead and do a quick search for this. We'll do JSON server. It should be maybe the second result here. So I'll try to link this up in the video description. So JSON server, here is the documentation for that. So let's just go ahead and go into getting started. So we have to install the JSON server, and then we have to create the db.json file, which could be auto-generated for us. And it's going to give us this JSON response. So we're going to modify this, turn on the server, and then make API calls to it. So let's go ahead and grab this right here, and let's make that install. So open up my terminal. So my server is still on. This is the other terminal. So I'm just doing npm install g JSON server, or -d JSON server. So that's going to take a second. We'll get that ready for us. All right, so that's installed. So I could just create a db.json file, and that would allow me to set it up manually. But there is a command that I can run that's going to create a JSON server for me. So we can actually run this command right here, JSON-server-watch db JSON. So it's going to create this file for us. So I'm going to execute this. Now, instead of just executing it, I want to turn it on right away. So this is going to create that file for us and then turn it on. Now, by default, this file turns on port 3000. Well, there's an issue with that because my React project is on port 3000. So what I'm going to do is actually specify that port. So we'll just do -- port. So we'll add in the port, and then we'll just do 8000. So let's specify that. So right here, we're going to see a file get generated. So we see that that port is on, db.json. Here it is. This is what just got generated for us. So what's happening here is we have this object that represents our database, And then we have the keys and the values here. So post here is going to give me a list of posts, which is just one right now. We have comments and a profile object. So by default, the routes will follow the key name. So if I want to go to post, all I have to do is port 8000 and then / post. So let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to open up port 8000. I'm actually just going to copy this from this link here. So let's do localhost. We'll copy that. Okay, so this is port 8000. So if I go to / post, there we go. So we see that JSON object. I'll zoom in, and this is what we currently have. So I want to change this up. So I can actually use my data in here. So what I'm going to do is remove the profile. So this is all JSON data now. It's not just JavaScript. I can remove comments, and I'm also going to remove post here. So what I'm going to do is change this to notes. So that's going to be my key. And then I'm going to go into my assets folder, data.json, and I'm just going to grab this array here. So I want to be able to render out my notes instead of the default data that we got. So we're now in db.json, paste that in. And because this is JSON data, make sure everything is in double quotes here. Take out the trailing commas right here. And let's save that. And let's go to this route. So now I have this route called notes. So really quick to set up a backend. This is going to represent a full or almost a full backend. Okay, so there we go. So I go to port 8000 notes, and here is my data. Now I can actually make GET requests to this. I can also make post, put, and delete requests. So if I look at the documentation here, so basically anything that has the first route, in this case is post. In my case, it's going to be notes. So I can go to post. This will get me all the notes. If I go to the notes and then the ID, I can go ahead and go to a specific note. And then if I want to add some data, I just send it to notes. So this route right here, and I just change the method type. So it represents like a RESTful API. Okay, so now that that's running, I want to change up one more thing here. Now, every time I start this application, I don't want to have to run this command here. So I had to run JSON server watch db JSON and then specify the port. I don't want to have to do that every time. So I'm going to create a quick shortcut inside of package.json. So let's close out all my components. Let's remove all of that. So I'm just going to backspace that, close this out, open up quite a bit. I always need to clear everything here. So let's go into package.json. And down here inside of scripts, we're going to add in another script here. So we'll add in a comma, and we're just going to do server. And we're going to specify the script that we're going to run. So we're going to run json.server. So we're going to run that full command. So json-server. So this is what will be activated, -- watch. And then we're going to db.json. So that's the file. That is in my root directory right here. So that's the file. And then we're going to specify that to turn on port 5000. Okay, so once I set this up, make sure you spelt that correctly, and then open up your terminal. So now to start that server, all I have to do is npm run space start. No, not that. My bad. npm run server, like that. And that should turn it on. So I don't have to run that full command every single time. Still not sure why it's port 5000. Did I specify port 5000? Oh, I did 5,000. Yeah, I need to go to 8,000. Okay, so I'll turn that off again, and we'll restart that. Okay, so that took about 5 minutes. If I wasn't talking, it would have been a lot faster. Now that server is running, we're just going to make sure that it's working. We'll go to notes here, Control-Shift-R. I want to refresh that, and it's all good now. So let's go to the next step, and now we are going to talk about state. So here is another React concept. Oh, I see Justin Mitchell is here. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about a React concept. I'm going to be a little bit nervous with Justin watching. It's making me blush here. Okay, so I'm going to pull up these pictures here, and I'm going to do my best to try to explain state. So state inside of React is going to be the state of our component. And this represents the current state, as in a sidebar. Is the state of our component open or closed? If this is a modal, is it open or closed? Are we in dark theme or light theme? As a person, what's my state when it comes to the attribute of sitting? Am I standing or sitting? So it's information about something, or it's data about something here. So in our components, we can actually add in information about our component, and also we're going to add data to it. So this is where we're going to store our notes here. So in this case, this would be to a component for a product on an e-commerce website. We see a state here. It's just a JavaScript object. We see the price that's set to $19.99. We see the type, and is this product on sale? So all this information about this component or this object would be rendered out inside of the product component. So it's just information about what we're rendering out. So information about a component. Now, we used to set state inside of our class-based components. I know I referenced class-based components before, but we didn't really talk about them. We used to build out classes inside of React, and we still can do this. It's just a different way of doing things. But before, we used to use the constructor method. So you can see this object right here. We used to use the constructor method. We would add in the state. Here would be an object, and here are my notes. Now, typically, we wouldn't have this data in here already. We would call an API for this data, and we would simply render that out. So inside of class-based components, we would set it, update that state, and then we would just do this.state.notes, and then we would loop through and render that out. Now, with React, or with function-based components, it's going to be a little bit different. It's, in my opinion, a lot more seamless, I think, but it's also not that descriptive. So we still have our state, we still have our object, and what we do here is we use something called React hooks to update our state. So we have a hook right now. So React hooks are basically just a set of functions that we get to modify, to set, and work with our state. So we have a lot of these hooks already built in, and we're going to work with 2 of them right now. So we have React hooks here, and one of these hooks is called useState. So this is simply a function that takes in an optional parameter which sets the value of a state. Now, this function is going to return an array, and we can actually destructure that array. So right here, we have the value, so that would go in the first part of the array. So in this case, notes would be set to this array right here, or object if we had one. And then we have a setter method. This is going to be what we use to actually update this state. So let's say this state was empty by default. We would simply set that state with set notes and then reference the notes themselves. So useState is meant to set the value of our state and update our state. And we do it like this. Now, the difference here is we don't have to do this.state and then the actual state value. We can just access notes like this. We can just do notes.map, and there we go. So that's our state. And I also want to talk about React Lifecycle methods and our useEffect hook. So for anybody that came from class-based components, we had these lifecycle methods. So a React component has 3 different lifecycle methods. When the component first mounts, this is the first part of its lifecycle, or it has 3 main lifecycle methods. So when a component first mounts, this is a function that gets triggered right here. So in class-based components, we had component did mount. Then we had something that would fire off whenever a component was updated, or when the state was updated. So we had component did update. So this method would fire off and would have these effects that would trigger because of this update. So maybe we need to call more data or do something inside of our component. Then we had component will unmount. So whenever a component is being torn down from the DOM, this would get triggered. Now with React function-based components, we're no longer using these 3 methods here. We are going to be using the useEffect hook. Now, it doesn't get called 3 times as you see here. This is one function showing you 3 different scenarios. So to replicate component did mount, you would set this useEffect function, and you would add in a function inside of that function, and you have the option of adding in an array of dependencies. So that's useEffect. So when the component mounts, useEffect will trigger. So remember, that's component did mount. And we use this typically to call data when we first load a page. We need to render like a profile or a note. We would get that data really quick. So after that, we have a couple of different options here. So we have this array of dependencies, and useEffect, if we don't specify this, I'm seeing Justin in the chat, so it's distracted me. Justin, I'm getting fanboyish here. So useEffect fires off on the first load. Now, useEffect can also fire off on every single update, which would represent component did update. Now, this list of dependencies right here, or this array, would represent when this component also fires off. So if we set it to an empty array, it would fire off on only the first one, and it wouldn't fire off anytime else. So that's it. So use effect would only fire off on the first run, but if we didn't add that empty array, it would fire off on every single update. Now, what we could do is add in an array of dependencies. Let's say that if the ID changes or one of our components, one part of our state gets updated, we want to fire this off again or trigger use effect. We can add that in as a dependency. So we're going to see this in a second. I know I'm giving you some kind of, giving you some overview of this right now, but just want to kind of spend some time on this before we do it. So use effect with an array or an array of dependencies will fire off anytime that dependency gets updated. Now to replicate, component will unmount. All we do is add in a teardown function. So we have use effect and we add in the return method. And in that return method, we trigger or add in a function, and then we can do whatever we want. If we want to have a side effect when a component is done or removed from the DOM, we tear it down. So that's our quick recap of state and hooks here. So let's go ahead and continue. So let's go ahead and start using this. So let's go into our pages. We'll go to our notes list page, and let's go ahead and get rid of these notes. So we're no longer going to work with data.js. We want to start working with data from that database, but in order to do that, we need to use something like fetch or Axios to get that data and then load it in. So we're going to remove notes here. I'm going to comment that out, and we are going to set our state. So this is a function-based component, so add in a comma, and we're just going to go ahead and add in use state. So we're going to import it, and we're going to set it right here. So this is inside of our notes list page. We need to render some data. So we'll set the variable here, and let's just go ahead and do notes here. That's going to be the value, and then set notes. And then we're going to set that to use state. So use state is going to return this array, and by default, we set an empty array. So if I save this right now, if we go back into our page, check it out. We have nothing in here. We have 0 notes. We see the count. Nothing's happening at this point. So I'm also going to do the same for our note. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go into our note page. We'll just make that quick import. So we'll do use state, and we're going to remove the notes import, and we're also going to remove this method right here, that variable that searches for it. So in this case, we're just going to set that to note and set note. So we'll do use state, and the default value will be null. Okay, so we just set the state inside of our notes list and our note page. Now we need to actually get some data. So in order to get this data, let's go ahead and use that use effect method here. So we're going to do use effect here, and this is going to be a function. In this function, we're going to pass in another function, and we're going to add in the empty array for the dependencies there. So we only want this to fire off on the first load. Now we need to get some data. So let's go ahead and create a function here, and we're going to call this get notes. So this is going to be an arrow function. We'll finish building this out. And inside of this function, what do we want to do here? So we're going to use the fetch API. I'm just going to pull up some notes here. We're going to use a fetch API to get some data. So we're going to start with fetch here, and we're going to throw in a string, and we're going to go to the path that gives us that array of notes here. So we're going to copy that. We're going to get that JSON data, and I think I have an error because of how I'm building this out, because I click save here. So fetch is going to get us our notes here. So we're going to use async await here. So in this case, we need to work with that. So I need to make that an async function. So we need to set it like that. And I need to set the value there. I forgot to set that. Okay, so we're going to add in async. We cannot add in async to this function here. So remember that. We have to add that into a function one level past that. So with that, we're going to set let. If you don't know how async await works, I'd recommend checking this out. There's a lot of content on this. So with fetch here, we're going to get a response. So we're going to do a response, and we're going to set that to await. So we're going to await that response. Once we get that with the fetch API, we need to parse that data. So we're going to do data, and that's going to be set to await. We're still going to await that response, and that's going to be response.json. So there we go. We parse that data, and we should have some JSON data. So let me just console this out really quick. So we'll do console.log. Wow, I can't spell. Probably Justin in the chat. I can feel his vibes. Okay, so let's console that data out and see what's happening here. So really quick, I'm gonna have to do a quick refresh. Okay, await, what's happening? Response. Praveen, if you see an error, let me know.
Yeah, after async, I think you forget to add parentheses.
Ah, I see, yes. Okay, my mistake. There we go. Okay, so I can't see that response yet because I need to fire this function off. So this is where useEffect comes in. So this is going to represent our lifecycle methods. So I'm just going to trigger getNote when the component first loads. So if I refresh that, useEffect is not defined. I forgot the import. We also need to import that, so useEffect. All right. So here we go. Everything looks good. If I go to inspect, remember we're consoling out those notes. So here we see this data right here, and we see those notes. So we just got these from this API right here. So we called that data in. Now to render that, all we need to do is fire off set notes inside of get notes. So we're going to trigger this, and then we're going to set data to set notes. So we're basically taking that array that we just got and we're pushing that into state, and it's going to update this array. So that's what state is doing. It's mutable, so that means we can update it, whereas props we cannot update. Oh, I see Shuvo was already on that issue. So here we go. Now we have our data from our API and we loaded it into our state. Now when we click on this, we also need to update our notes list. So I want to show you one little error that a lot of beginners when it comes to React face. And let's see. Okay, so now it's good. So if I don't set this array of dependencies, I'm going to have an issue here. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that and then hit go. So if I reload my page, let's see. You see all these requests right now, we're at 200 and we're about to go to 300. That's a huge mistake. You don't want to do that. You're going to screw up your site if you do that. What's happening here is I didn't add in that array of dependencies, and this is why it's so important. And I have to show this because a lot of people run into this. What happens here is we call getNotes and we update our state. Now what happens every single time our state is updated? When our state is updated, based on this picture that I showed you, so for these hooks, based on these pictures, useEffect will get triggered every single time our state is updated. When useEffect gets triggered, we load in the data, we update our state, then useEffect gets triggered because our state was updated, therefore creating this infinite loop right here that goes crazy and eventually it'll just time out. So that issue occurs because we didn't tell it when to fire off. We told useEffect to fire off on every single change. Now we add in that array of dependencies. That's going to stop that error. So if I refresh it, now we stop at 13 requests and we are good. So we add that in, and then if we wanted a specific dependency to fire this off on, then we would add that. For now, it's only on the first load. So I wanted to show you that error there. Okay, so let's go into our note page now. So we want to get data when we go to our notes. So we need to call the API now and get data here. So it's going to be the same here. We're going into note page. We're going to add in useEffect. This is in the single note page. I'm just going to leave that right there just in case you need it. One thing about state, this should be set at the top level of your component, and it also should never be set inside of useEffect or any other functions like that. So when you're actually creating your initial state, set that at the top level. That's the only thing I can remember at this point. So let's go ahead and create our lifecycle method. So we're going to use useEffect. We'll add the function inside of useEffect. And for the array of dependency, at this point, I'm just going to add in the note ID. So anytime the note ID changes, then go ahead and fire off useEffect. So this is one dependency that we do want. Now we're going to create a function here. So we're going to call this get note, and then we're just going to do async. And then we're going to create the function. Didn't forget the parameters this time, or the parentheses. We're going to use fetch here. So we're going to do let response. And that's going to be set to await and then fetch. Okay, so something is going to be a little bit different here, not that much different. So let's see, response. Okay, so to get a single note, we need to pass in the ID of the note. So I'm just going to copy that. So notes and then add the ID. Then we will go into here, and I'm going to use backticks instead of quotes. We'll paste that in, and I need this value right here to be dynamic. So we're going to change that. We're going to use template literals, and we're just going to throw in the note ID. So note ID like that. So now we know exactly where we're sending that call. And let's just move that a little bit there. And let's go ahead and get the data. So we'll get data. That's going to be set to await. And we are setting that to response.json. So we parse that. Then we go ahead and use that set note, so the update method or the setter method, and we're passing in that object. So remember, we return a object, so that's okay to update our state with that. So we throw that in, and we want to fire this off inside of useEffect. So if I save that, let's check this out. All right, so there we go. So when I click on a note, so first we call the API, we get the note, and then when I click on a single note, we use this ID, we call the backend, we load that data in, and we update our state. uState versus Redux. Redux is a store to deal with global state or different levels of state when you have components all relying on the same state. So just think of it as like a global state and a global store that we can update. In this case, uState uState is going to be for component-based state. So I'm trying to figure out a better way to explain that. Because we're not adding our state into other components, we can use that just for a single component. Let's just put it that way. It's component-based state. Whereas Redux is an entire state management library. So we have our data. Let's go ahead and add in some CRUD functionality. So let's get to the good stuff here. So the first thing I want to do is be able to actually update my note here. So let's go ahead and add this in. So let's see. Inside of our note, remember that we couldn't update this. So when I'm clicking on this, we can't update it. And then we also have an error if I go into the console. Or I did have an error. Apparently it's not there right now. Okay, so we have this issue of not being able to update it. So let's first do that. So we will go into our text area. So the first thing I want to do in the text area is be able to update that state. So we'll just do on change. So every single time we even make an update, so on key up, we're going to add in a function that's going to take in the event. And then in that function, we're going to add in set note. The reason why we need to add in that function is because if I just threw in set note like that, it would fire off immediately, and we don't want it to fire off until that change is actually made. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and add in an object here, and we're going to use the spread operator. So we're saying update the original note and specifically update the body, and the value to this body is going to be e.target.value. So the value of the actual text area. So this is going to fire off set state, and it's going to keep updating that. So if I go in here now, I should be able to update the state. So it's updating it, and we can see that in our note. So now I want to be able to actually save this note when I click back. So let's go ahead and add in a update note method. So we're going to do let update note. So this function is simply going to fire off a put method to the backend. It's going to send the object, therefore updating it in the database. And the backend, based on the documentation, already tells us it's going to update it as long as we send an object here. So let's go ahead and create this function first. And let's see, do I need to make this an async function? I actually can't remember how I did this before. So just for safety here, I'll just add in async. So we'll just make it an async function right away. And we're going to use await here. And let's throw in fetch. So we're going to throw in fetch. And to update it, we're just going to use this same URL here. So remember that in the documentation, if you go to the JSON server documentation, it's going to tell us how to send these requests. So it's saying send a put request to that same URL here, so that ID. So we're going to throw that into this fetch call. So we're going to notes the note ID, so it knows which one to update. And now we need to specify a few more things here. So in here, because this is not a GET request, that's the default here. We're going to set the method, and we're going to make this a put request. So put is usually for updating, whereas post is usually for adding things to the database. Then we will throw in our headers here. So in our headers, let's specify the content dash type. And the content type, we're going to specify this as JSON. So we'll do application / JSON. So that's specifying the data type, and we need to send the body. So what are we going to update that data with? So we're going to pass in the update here, or the data of our note. So this was kind of annoying because typically we can just do JSON.stringify, and we can pass in the note like that. So we should be able to just throw in the note right here. Now the only issue here is that in the backend, so inside of the db.json file, there is an updated value here. So if I update it, what's going to happen is this item will actually not be updated. And when I create a note, we don't have an ID that goes with it. So typically the backend would deal with this. When we do this project in Django and React, it's going to happen automatically for us. But in here, because the backend, I probably could configure it that way, but because it doesn't automatically do it, what I'm going to have to do is pass in the object, use the spread operator, pass in the original note, and then specify the updated value, and then just do, let's see, that was going to be new date. So it's not that much more, but we just have to throw in the object and make sure you pass in the original note. So that's what we're doing here. We're sending that data, and then once we're done updating that note, that's it. So that's all the function does, is it sends a put request to the backend to this URL. Now I'm going to create another method here, and I'm going to call this one handle submit. This is going to fire off anytime we click the done button when we add it, or when we click link or the back arrow. So we want to handle a submission. So this will be handle submit, and this will take care of any logic that we're going to add. So we're going to do handle submit, and in this method, all we're going to do is just run update note, and we want to redirect the user back to the last page or to the home page. So for this, when we added the router, we were given a parameter called history. So history allows us to work with where we were before and how to change up the path that where the current user is. So we're going to use history, and let's go ahead and just do history. So just look into the React Router DOM if you want to understand that a little bit better. So just do history.push and then send the user to the home page. So when handle submit is fired off, we're going to update our note and send the user to the home page. So handle submit, let's bring that in right here. We'll do on click. All right. So handle submit will fire that off, and let's test this out. So let's see if we have any errors. Go to the console, refresh everything. And let's just do finish project. Okay, so if I click back, handle submit was fired off. And let's see. Let's try wash car. For some reason, the way that object is being updated is actually not working. So give me a second. So we run handle submit, we run update note. In update note, we send the put request, JSON.stringify. What am I doing wrong here? So let's go to the db.json file. So what's happening is the data doesn't look like it's actually being updated. Oh, and by the way, this file right here, db.json, will actually auto-generate IDs, so we won't have to worry about creating that. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do a little bit of debugging. Let's see if Shuvo can come in and help me fix this, or Praveen, maybe you noticed it. So we send that method to the ID. It's port 8000. We send the method of put. We pass in the headers, application, body, JSON.stringify, note, updated. Huh. I am not seeing it right now. Let me try something here. So
the note, right?
yeah, update note. I'm just trying to see what I'm doing wrong here. First major error of this live stream. Okay, so we send the method. We send a put request.
You have to set the header. Okay, you have set the headers. Yeah.
Content type. So headers. Oh, header. I was supposed to do headers. Okay, there we go. Dang it. Stupid error. Okay, let's refresh that and let's update a note. So if I go back, let's go to these other notes that are still being output, and we'll fix that in a little bit. So now I can actually modify notes. So if I go to wash car, we'll add in another one. We'll just say finish project, go back. There we go. It was updated. Okay, I misspelled there. but that's all working. So what's happening here is when we click the back button, we fire off handle submit. Handle submit triggers update note and it redirects the user back. And technically, actually, we don't need that link there. But after we fire off update note sends a put request, sends the data, adds in that new note, sets the object, and that's it. So what we want to do now is add in the delete note method. So let's go ahead and do that. So down here inside of our header, I'm going to add in another part to our project here. So we'll just add in a button. So we'll just do delete. So anytime we go to edit a note, we want to be able to delete that note too. So let's make sure that's added. When I go to a note, when I click on this, I want to be able to delete it. So we added the button, and now what I'm going to do is create a delete note function. So we'll go up here, let's see, update note, we'll add in delete after. Okay, so delete note. How's the chat doing? Oh, the slides, yeah, I'll make sure to share that inside of the, I see someone's asking for the actual slides here. We'll make sure to share that in the GitHub repo. I'll try to remember to do that right after. So in delete note, what I'm going to do here is actually copy this entire method. So we're going to copy that method, we'll paste that in, and here's what we're going to do. So we're going to pass in that note ID. So we're still sending it. So we're going to the same route. We need to specify the note that we want to delete. The only difference here is the method has to be delete. So the backend will already know. This is how RESTful APIs typically work. They just listen for a method and then it knows what to do based on the HTTP method that we sent. Okay, so somebody already mentioned the typo. Nice. Should have watched the chat. So we set the content type, we pass this in. I actually don't think I need to send the body, but just in case, let's just pass in the note. There's no need to add in a new date here. We're setting that, and then inside of delete note, I actually want to redirect the user. And the reason for this is because I want to be able to trigger this function without needing to click handle submit. So history dot push, and we're going to send the user back to the home page. So we're adding that in. History.push. What's going on here? Okay, another spelling error.
JSON.stringify there, I think. You have added extra. Maybe.
So delete note.
At the end of 39th line. After note, you have curly braces.
After note. Oh, I see. I think I caught that. Okay. So there's my function, history.push. All right. Something still looks weird. Give me 1 second. Let's try to.
After note, you have curly braces.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay, so we have
you still function. Have to put the curly braces before history.
Yep, there we go. I deleted the wrong one. So fetch, and then history.push. Okay. So that looks good. So now we can just go to delete note. So this is going to send a delete request to that method, and it's going to tell it what note to delete. Now on this delete button, we're just going to do on click, and we're going to trigger delete note. So that's it. Let's try to refresh this. Okay, so on delete, completely screwed up that entire thing.
Async function to use await.
Oh yeah, that's correct. Man, it got me rattled here. I'm mess up once and then I start doing it a lot. So async, refresh that. Okay, so we have these 3 notes. We're going to go ahead and delete the top one, delete, and there we go. So it's removed. I can delete the second one, and that's good. So I want to do one more thing here, and that is to delete a note whenever everything is removed. So in the Notes app that I use on my iPhone, whenever I go all the way back and remove a note, it completely gets removed if I click back or once that note is done. So what I'm going to do here is update this note and then add in that functionality. So, okay, there we go. So that was updated. It just looks like it just lagged. So it should also delete automatically. So we're going to go into this handle submit button here, and we're going to add in some logic. So the first thing is I want to delete the note if, and we'll add in the condition. So if the note ID is not equal to new, so we're going to add that parameter in a second when we're creating a new note. So if it's not a new note and there is no note body. So if we're editing a note and when we submit it, there is no body in that note, well, then we just want to delete the note. We'll fire that off, and then we'll just do else if we're going to add in one more condition. So in this condition, we want to fire off update note, and we need to add in the parameters. So in this case, we'll just say if the note ID is not equal to new, so note ID, if this is not equal to new, then fire off update note. And we're going to add in one more condition for create note. So let's try this. So we have delete note, that's all working, but now I'm just going to do a hard refresh just in case. We're going to go to that note, I'll remove it, click back, and that note is gone. So when we click back or delete, if that note is empty, it will be removed. So nice little thing that kind of makes it seem seamless, I guess. So I really like that. And I like how the app actually works on my phone in that case. So the last thing is to create a create method here. So create note. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this update note method. For the sake of time here, we're just going to copy and paste that. And we're going to change this one to create. So we're going to do create note, and whoops, headphone popped out. So we'll go to create note. And in this case, based on the documentation, I'm just going to leave the backticks there. That's fine. In the documentation, to create an item, what we need to do is send that post request to this URL. So just to notes, but that needs to be a post method. So we're going to send that. We still send the object. We create a new note with it, so we know when it was updated. And then we're going to go ahead and add in an extra parameter here. So we'll just do else if, and in this case, let's see, when do we want to fire this off? So if the note ID is equal to new, so note ID, if this is new, and if the note body is not null, so if note is not equal to null. So remember that before we start adding things, note will be set to null. So that's what we're doing. We're making sure we actually have a value to save. Now, if that's the case, we're going to fire off create note, which will simply send a post request to this URL, sending the post request, sending that object. Now, I need to get to this page here. So there's a few things here that I want to fix before we do that. The first thing is when we go to, actually here, let's link to the page first. Let's do that. So to actually make this work, I need to add in an icon like you saw in the demo here. So we're going to go ahead and add in another component, and I'm going to create it as its own component to show you a different way of doing things and to show you how we can add in some more logic to that. So we'll just go to components, and we're just going to call this add button. So we need an add button to be able to even trigger that action. We'll do React arrow function component exported, generate a new component. In here, we need to import the React router DOM. So React-router-DOM. We're going to import link. Throw that in. What did I click? Okay, so we have the link, and we also need to import an icon. So again, you can go into the GitHub repo, and we can import this add.svg. Or you could go to Mumble UI, and we can just search for add. So that's going to give us this plus icon. We want the one without a circle, and we're going to bring that in here. So bring that into our assets, and I'm going to rename that just to make sure the name is add.svg. So in the add button, we want to import that. So we're just going to do IMP here for that shortcut, and we're just going into assets, and then we're going into add.svg. From add.svg, we want to import React component, and then that's going to be as add icon. So that's how we want to actually use it. And then we're going to take this add icon, throw that into this div here. So that's going to give us the icon.
That add icon directly.
The SVG, I don't know. I ran into an issue before. I don't think so, but I could be wrong actually.
I mean, instead of React component.
Here, let's try this. Import add. I'm trying to remember how this would work. So you're saying something like this. Well, then I'm having to use the actual SVG, so I can't just use it as a component like that. That's why we set it like that. So we'll have to check that out maybe towards the end of the stream. But I could use the SVG directly, but if I do it this way, it just makes it a lot cleaner. That's, I guess, the purpose of it. Okay, so in this add button, we want to send the person to the note page to add it. So we're just going to do to And we're going to set the path here to note/new. So that means that dynamic parameter that used to be our ID will now be new. So that's why we were able to do this, where we say if node ID is new. So we're able to check it up against that because that ID parameter is going to be new when we click on this button. So the last thing I want to do here is add in a class here for styling. So we'll just do class. That's going to be floating dash button. That's all in the CSS. So look that up. It makes that float inside of our notes here. And we can now go to the notes list page and import that. So we'll just do import, and then we're going into components. Okay, so add button, bring that in here. So inside of our notes, so outside of the notes list, this is where we're going to use it. So we'll throw that in, and there we go. Let's check it out. Okay, so we have this add button here. So when I click on it, I'm generating this page here. We're using that as the URL, and there's going to be a few issues that I want to fix here, and then we're going to add in the functionality to actually add the note here. So the first thing is, when we first load the notes page, we are going to run into a small error. It's not that big of an error, but if you check the network tab, what's happening here is we are going to try to make a request to get a note. So let me try to refresh that. Okay, so up here, we see that in red somewhere here. So we're trying to make this request to pour 8,000 notes and then new. So why that's happening is because when we first load the note page, we have this get note method, and we're trying to make that request. Well, when the note ID is new, that's not going to work for us. So let's go ahead and fix that. 1 second here. So we're going to go ahead and write in a condition here. So we're going to say if the note ID is equal to new, go ahead and stop the rest from firing off. So stop all this from being triggered and just go ahead and return. So that's going to stop that, and it's going to take out that error. So if I refresh this, we're now no longer going to see that error. So that quickly just fixes that, and we can continue from here. So let's go ahead and go down here and add in a done button too. So when we add a note, we can actually submit that. So the first thing is we're going to create a condition so we can't delete a new note. When we go to create, we don't want to be able to delete a note that doesn't exist yet. So we want to do that first. Let's go ahead and go to the note page. So here's our delete button, and we're going to use the ternary operator to create a condition here. So let's see. Okay, so if the note ID is not equal to new, then we're going to add in the delete button. So we can add in the question mark, the parentheses, we're going to throw in the delete button. So that means if it's updating a note, go ahead and throw in the delete button. Else, we can add in the create button. So we'll just say done. Now for this click, we're going to do handle submit. So handle submit is what's going to fire that off. So we won't be able to actually add a note just yet, but it's going to show you the functionality. So when we go to add that note, we're going to see done. When we have a note, it's going to say delete. Now all we need to do is inside of handle submit. Let's see. Oh, I already added that. Okay, perfect. So I should be able to add a note right now. So if I go ahead and go to add, we'll just say new note, hit done. What happened here? Okay, so history.push. Praveen, I'm going to add you to the stream. Okay, so create note did not fire off. I just want to see what I'm doing here if the note is not new. Okay, so are we adding a note at all? I'm going to do a hard refresh. Okay. Handle submit is fired, or is fired off if no ID is equal to new and note is not null. Here, let me just add a note here. I'm just going to console something out. So the good debugger, we'll just do console.log, and we'll just do create note. Maybe the error is in the actual request. So create note is not even being fired off. So it looks like it's in the condition then. So it's somewhere here. So note ID is new. Here, let's just try to fire this off directly then. We'll just put this inside of create note. We'll go ahead and refresh that. Let's just see if that function is working. So if I hit done, and then I go back to my notes list. Okay, so the note is being added. So for sure, it's the fact that we are not firing off that method. So we'll just put it, add in handle submit there. Okay, so if the
we have to use note.body.
Where at?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
In comments, show is helping like
Okay, if no ID
body not equal to check
this
chat.
one right here. Oh, I see. Okay, not equal to. There we go. So we were firing off update. That's why. Okay, found it. So basically, we were firing off update note because that was equal to new before it got here. That's what it was. Okay, so if I go ahead and add in a new note, we're just going to say new note, done. Okay, hold on. Let me try that one more time. Another, done. Okay, there we go. So it was lagging. So also, if I go to add a note and I do that, and then if I go, let's just write Praveen's name. So we'll just do Praveen the vampire. If we go back, there we go, that note is added. So on handle submit, all the logic is done. Now if we want to update it, so we'll just do updated, go back, it's updated. We're also able to delete. Perfect. All right. So we're almost done. We have a little bit of cleanup work to do. In that preview, I showed you how the notes were being displayed, where we had a date and we trimmed data down. This is one of the things that I'm most proud of this project here is besides the seamless updating is the fact that we're able to clean that data, and I really had fun with this. This is where Sharir Shuvo really helped me. He was the one that prepped the project for me, did an awesome job with it. So in this case, what we want to do is anytime we go to one of these notes, we want to start the first line as the title and then any other line as the body of the note. So if we go here, we see new note, another, and we'll just say lorem ipsum. Let's just get some lorem ipsum text. So there's a few issues that occur here. So let's say we add in all of this, throw that in, go back. Trying to figure out, I don't think it's an error and why it's not firing off. I think it's, there we go. I feel like it's just delaying a little bit. Okay, so we have a few issues here. So the first one is we want to generate a title and then look at the list of the note body right here. That looks really bad. So we want to fix that here. So let's go ahead and take care of that. We'll go into our list item, and this is why I separated it into its own section here. So our list item is where we're going to trim everything down. So the first thing is we could just try to trim the body, but we actually want to do something a little bit more with it. So give me a second to prep here. We'll go to list item. Okay, so first thing I want to do is get the title of a note. So let's just go ahead and set a function here, and we're going to call this get title. So this will be a function that takes in the note, set that, and let's go ahead and get these values. So we'll get the title, so const title. This is going to be set to note.body. So we're going to do note.body, and then we're going to do split. So this will trim it down, and we're going to split it first by the new lines. So anytime we have new lines inside of our JSON data, so if we go to db.json, you see these new lines. Well, it's going to split it by this. It's going to turn it into an array, and we're going to get the first line. So the split method will turn this into 1, 2, 3, 4 arrays. Okay, yeah, 4 arrays. So it's going to turn it into that. So we're going to split it, and then we're going to get the first array. So we'll do 0 index right there, and that's going to give us the title. So then we can just do return title, and that's it. So we're still going to fix this up a little bit, but now inside of here, we can just do get title. So the function is outside of the component, by the way. So just in case anyone missed that. So we'll do get title, and we'll pass in the note, which will trim it and return it. So here we go. So you see how we have more lines here than just one? Well, that data was still trimmed down and we only got the first one. Where we have this section and all this content, it only got the first line. Now, what if my content was a little bit longer? So what if that title was super long? So what we could do is we can write a condition here. We'll just say if title.length, not list item, accidentally hit delete. So if title.length is greater than 45. So if it's greater than 45, let's go ahead and trim this down even more and then add a dot here. Or not trim it, but we'll add in a dot. So we'll just do title.slice. So we will actually trim it. We'll trim it from 0 to 45. So we'll get the first 45 characters, and then we want to add in ... Actually, you know what? I don't want to do that. I just want to return back the first 45 characters. So that will be our title. So let's say Praveen the Coding Vampire was added multiple times. So that is one long title. It should trim it down. Okay, so there we go. So now we're not getting the entire length of it. We're just getting the first 45 characters. Accidentally hit Control S. Okay, perfect. So we also want to add in a date. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll just add in a paragraph tag. Every time I get up, I knock the headphones down. So we'll add in a span tag. So we'll do span. And in here, we could just do note.updated to get the updated date. But this looks a little bit ugly. So that date format looks horrible. So what I want to do is trim that down too and make that look nicer. So we'll add in another method here. And we'll just do let get date. Set that value. We'll pass in the note here. And this is going to be a really easy method where we will just return. And we're just going to get a new date. Let's see. Why is return looking funny? So we'll just do note dot updated. And we're going to do to local date string. Okay, so my return method looks weird. Note is equal to, oh.
It is not the
finish up the arrow function.
Arrow function.
Yep. Okay, so get date. So all we need to do now is throw that in here. We'll do get date, pass in note. And there we go. That looks better. Okay, so for the body now, so we want to actually throw in the body of the note after. And this is going to be generated a little bit differently here. So in this case, we're going to create a method called get content. So we're going to call it get content. This is going to be the actual note content. And in here, let's go ahead and first get the title. So what we want to do is get the body and derive it from the title. So in this case, this is the body. We want to make sure the note doesn't actually exist in that body. So we want to remove the original title from it. So we're going to have to get the title. So we get the title here, and title will be, let's see, get title. Or 1 second. Okay, so title is going to be get title. We'll pass in the note object. And after that, we want to get the content. So we'll do let or const. Here, we'll just use let here. Keep that consistent.
What will happen if you use const instead of let?
I think const is not mutable. Shuvo, if you can help me out with that. I am not that sure actually myself. So const, I believe, is immutable, meaning you can't actually modify it. If anyone wants to jump in. Oh, Robert, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Robert's the awesome Flutter developer. So for the content, we'll do note.body. And we are first going to replace all the new lines. So we'll just do replace all. And we're just going to go ahead and do \n. So we're going to replace all the new lines with an empty quote there. So we're going to clear all that space. Right after that, so const acts like a constraint. That's what Shuvo is saying. Okay, so we have the content. We replace all the new lines. Then we're going to go ahead and do content. And we're going to do content.replace all. And this is where we can just throw in the title. So we're throwing in the title and we're removing it. So we're adding in an empty string where that title was. So we're removing the title from the body. So that's why we threw that in there. And there we go. So now all we need to do is return it. So we're just going to do if content dot length is greater than 45. Then let's go ahead and return content dot slice 0 through 45. So we're getting the first 45 characters, else return, and this is going to be content. Okay, so let's try this. Let's see how this method works. We're going to do get content. We trimmed it down, and in here we can do get content, and we'll pass in note. All right, there we go. So new note. One thing here, I don't like how the body is being displayed. We see these right here, and I'm seeing 1, 2, 3 all in one line. So what I'm going to do here is actually go to this method right here. So where we're setting the new lines, I'm just going to try to add in a space here. So I want to see if that will fix it. That should look better. Okay, 1, 2, 3, that looks better. So you notice how the title, another right here, or Praveen the Vampire, is not updated in the body. It's not in there, so we simply removed it and we generate the body of the note. So that is actually it for all the functionality of this application. Now the last thing we need to do here is actually deploy it. And I was thinking about deploying this to Netlify. I don't know if I want to do this live. Are we doing good on time? Let's take a little break here to let me breathe. And we can deploy to Netlify if everybody wants to see that. So let me know and talk about the production stuff here. All right.
Yeah, let us know about in the comment section if you want to see this deploy.
My coffee's all cold now. Okay, so I'm just going to start it, and then we'll just kind of see what the response is like. So everything we've been working inside of right now is all inside of the development environment. So let's pull up the code here. So this is all inside of the development environment. This is where we can edit, update our application, and so on, and that's awesome. But once it comes time to deploy, we are not actually deploying all of this code. What we're going to do is run a command called npm run build. It's going to bundle up this code, and it's going to create an optimized version for this. It's going to create an optimized version of our application. So basically, it's taking like a timestamp of it, turning it into static files, and bundling it up for us into its own folder. So at this point, let's just go ahead and run that run build command. So I'm going to turn off my development server. Here, let's just add in a new one. I'm going to keep my development server on. So we're just going to do npm run build. So when I run this command, we're going to see a new folder get generated right here. So it's going to generate it in a second. There we go. It's still bundling up my code. So it's taking all my code, optimizing it right now, and putting it into this build folder. So this build folder is what we're actually going to deploy here. So there's a few things I still want to show you when it comes to this here. So give me 1 second to prep this. So now that we have it, our folders are all bundled up. So if I want to see that build folder locally, I need to install this HTTP server that helps us serve static files. So I'm going to run this install. In fact, I think I already have it, so I'm going to have to install it again. So we'll do npm install, and then we're just going to do -g serve, and that should run that install for me. So go ahead and install that static file server. So we're going to install it and then turn on another server to actually see this code here. So now once we have that, we can do serve-s build. So let's just go ahead and copy this right here. That should be in your code or in your terminal. So serve-s build. Okay, so I want to specify the port here, so we'll just do -p, and we're going to run this on port 5000. So that's going to turn on that server, and I can just copy this right here. Okay, so now check this out. So we're on port 5000, and we're also on port 3000. Right now, I'm able to see these notes right here because that JSON server is on, but once we deploy it, we actually won't see the notes. We'll still see the project, but not the notes because we need a full backend for that. Now, this code right here is what's being deployed right here from this build folder. So if I want to make an edit here, so let's just go ahead and go to our home page here, or into our components, into our header. If I want to generate a new header, I can just say new header like this. If I save that, we've been working with a hot reloading. So if I go to port 3000, I can see that change right here. That's my new header. If I go to port 5000, I don't see it. So I'm going to have to run build again. It's going to take a snapshot of that code, put that new code into that build folder, and then we'll see it. So let's try this. So we'll go back in here, we'll turn off that server, and we'll just do npm run build. So it's going to run that build again. It's not going to create a new folder. It's just going to put in the new code in there, basically redo everything, if I'm saying that right. And let's go ahead and do serve build port 5000 again. So now let's see what we did in that new build folder. So now I can refresh port 5000 and we're seeing that new header. So you can see the difference. One's in development, one's in production. So to close this out, what I'm going to do here is actually revert to the notes list title. I'm going to run npm run build again, and that's going to make the final build. So we're about to deploy this. So in theory, we can actually we can stick to that build folder. We actually don't need this code anymore. Now, that's not smart because we still want that code to make changes, but in theory, we only need what's inside of that build folder. So let's go ahead and go to Netlify, and Netlify is really cool. You don't need a credit card on file. You can just create an account. All you need is your email. Go ahead and sign up, create an account, and let's go ahead and deploy our application. So there's two ways of doing things. The first one is going to be super easy. All we're going to do is go to our Notes app here. So My Notes, we're going to grab that build folder. So this is going to be very easy. We're grabbing this build folder, and we're simply going to drag that in to Netlify. Let's see, did that work? Let's try that one more time. Uploading. Okay, so there we go. So now if I go to the site here, if I go back to my account, I can go to my sites. We can see this site. I can open this up. This is a live URL now. So I can actually put this in the chat. Everybody can see the site. Now the only thing about this is that, hold on, how the hell is how are my notes being displayed in the live site? Is that because my JSON server is on? That should not be the case. Okay, so there we go. That's more correct. Okay, so you're going to see the site, but you're not going to see the actual notes. That's because you want to use like a real API for that. That was just for testing. But this is a live link. Anybody can go to that link right now. After I post this video, after the live, I'll probably take it down so you won't see it. But we have officially deployed our site. So it's as simple as dragging and dropping. So that is not the most ideal way. Typically, you'd want to upload your project to something like GitHub and deploy it from there. So that's what we're also going to do. This is going to take a little bit longer, but there's also a lot of benefit to that when it comes to sharing your code, working with it, and just being able to make those updates. Also, there is something called automatic deploy or updates. I forgot what it was called. Or continuous deploy, which means that all you have to do is push to GitHub and your code will just be automatically deployed without you having to go to Netlify and redeploy it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do the GitHub version. So we're going to go to our account here. So we're on Netlify, and let's just do new site from Git. And we're going to use GitHub here. There's GitLab and Gitbucket. The first thing I need to do is connect my account to GitHub. So you'll be walked through the defaults here. Let's see. So I'm going to need to connect my account to GitHub. So we'll just go to GitHub first. So we're going to need to upload this repo. So at this point, we're done with the project. We're just doing the final steps here. So we'll just do my notes. I'm going to create a new GitHub repo. I'm going to set it to private. We'll create the repository. And here are the instructions to get this prep. So let's go ahead and go to this project. I'm going to turn off all these servers. And the first thing is I need to work with my local Git account here, or my local GitHub repo. So we'll do git init. So I have a full video on YouTube on this. If you don't know how to do this, follow along. It should be pretty simple. So we initialize our local GitHub repo. Then what we need to do is do git status, check it out, see what we have. So we have all these files that need to be added to that GitHub repo. So we're just going to do git add. It's basically taking all the files that we have and prepping them for deploying to our GitHub account. So once we run git add, I can do git status. I can see everything in green. This is what was added to that new environment locally. We are now going to commit those files to that local environment. So we're going to do git commit -m, and we're just going to do first commit. Okay, so now we're ready to push to our GitHub account. So we want to push this code to github.com. So in this case, I didn't worry about making that main branch. So if you want to do that, that's up to you. However you have that set, you can follow these instructions. So in my case, I'm going to set my remote my remote. I'm going to set the remote to this GitHub repo. So my local GitHub repo is now going to connect to that. So I copy that. Now we're connected to it. And I just need to push my code. So git push -u origin. In my case, my main branch is master. If yours is main, make sure you add in main. So we'll just do git push -u origin master. There is a public repo. I see someone referring to that. This is just privately because I'm uploading it right now. I always make sure to check my code before I push it. So if I refresh this, this is all my code now. So now we have this project on GitHub. So now if we go back to Netlify, I can go ahead and search for my notes. I'm actually fairly new to Netlify. So let's configure Netlify to GitHub. In my case, I'm gonna have to add in my credentials. So we'll add in the credentials and let's see, okay, I'm trying to figure out what step I'm at right now. Trying to remember
to the
this.
bottom.
Is it at the bottom? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, the bottom of this section. Okay, so I go to my account. Okay, here we go. That's what I missed. Okay,
Yep.
so I can select all repositories, which is going to give Netlify access to all my repos, or I can select one. In my case, I only want to do my notes here. So Netlify now has access to it. We're ready to go, and we should be connected. So let's just go ahead and continue. So we're going to go here, and here is a command that it's going to run. So in theory, we don't have to run npm run build by ourselves. Netlify will run this for us. So what I'm going to do here is deploy the site. It's going to run npm run build. It's going to get that build folder that's going to be generated for us, and that is what it's going to deploy. Now, when I'm going to deploy this, it's actually going to cause an error and throw an error for us, and I want to show you this error before we fix it. So let's go ahead and hit deploy. This is going to take like a minute or two, so just bear with me. We can see that it's deploying. We can see the build logs, and this is going to take some time. So we're going to throw these errors. And actually, let me talk about what's going to happen here before it actually occurs. So essentially what's happening here is, let's just do npm start, and we'll turn on our development environment. So there are these errors that we're going to see inside of our React application. They're not necessarily errors. They're more of just warnings. I don't have my JSON server on, so we are going to see this error. We're not worried about this. But any warnings you see like this, where you see certain imports, or maybe you imported a certain library and you didn't use it, React will throw these warnings for you, and they're just trying to keep your code a little bit cleaner for you. And there's certain things you should look out for, but they're not exactly errors. What Netlify is going to do, Netlify is simply going to see these errors, and it's going to, or see these warnings, and it's going to treat them like errors. So it's not going to deploy it. We're going to throw this error, and a lot of people don't understand what's going on. So what we're going to have to do is go to a virtual environment that we have, or an environment variable, and this is called continuous integration. Its shortcut is CI. We're simply going to set this environment variable to false, and that just means that we can ignore these warnings. We're going to fix it ourselves. Don't stop our site from deploying. So that's why we're going to get the error. So the build is finishing. Let's see if we're done here. Let's go back to our site. Okay, so the build failed here. So it was because of that deployment process, because of those warnings, why this error failed. So don't let that scare you. You could just go back and fix those, and I would recommend that. But sometimes you don't have time to go back to everything. You're trying to see your site or deploy it quick, and you just want to ignore those because they may not be that big of an issue. So we're just going to go to site settings. We're going into general, build and deploy. And in here, inside of build settings, we're going into edit. And right here, before we run npm run build, we're just going to set CI in caps here. And then we're going to set that to equals. And that's going to set continuous integration to false. So we can save that. And let's go ahead and just run this build again. So we'll go to our site here. So right now it didn't work, so the deploy failed. So let's go back to deploys here. Site has not been deployed. Let's click on it. Whoops, accidentally went to the GitHub repo. Okay, so here we go. We're in this area, so we went to deploys to that site, and let's just trigger another deploy. So deploy site. Now this error should go away. Hopefully, I don't end up having another one, but that should fix it. So give that a minute or two, and that should fix this issue for us. All right. Yeah, first method is very easy. It's not exactly ideal for many reasons, especially when you're working in a team. You don't want to be dragging and dropping files in. Let's see. Connection lost. In what way? I see Ujwal is saying that. Are we still live, Praveen?
Yeah.
Yeah, this live will be posted. Remember though, you also have the free Udemy course. So if you want to see this without all these mess ups, without me having to stumble through or talking back and forth to the audience, get to the point quicker, the Udemy course is there. It's free right now if you get it in the first 3 days. So the coupon code was activated like 2 hours ago, right before the stream. As long as you use it before this time is up, that coupon code has no limit. So it's unlimited right now. So go ahead, go to the video description and register. There we go. Praveen just posted it. So let's see. All right. So the build is complete. We have a lot of people have already registered on the Udemy course. Wow. Cool. Okay. So look at that. The build is complete. And let's go back to my Netlify account. This is the website that let me remove this. This is the website that we deployed from dragging the files in. This is the one deployed from GitHub. So now if I go to view, this is the other link, and I'm going to post this one in the chat now. So both sites are live. Remember, we're not seeing the nodes because we need to build out that backend. Now, the stream for the project, we're officially done. I'm probably going to stop this at 2:30. Let's set aside 5 minutes maybe to go back and forth here. What I'm probably going to end up doing is building out the React or the Django backend. So I might work off of this code base, or I might start another stream from scratch and actually build out a full API using the Django REST framework. I want to build out the API so we're not having to use something like JSON server. So we're going to work with that. That stream, I'm not exactly sure when I do it. I might do it tomorrow. If I see a good response from that, I might make a post, get a vote here. But whoever wants to see a full backend integrated, we're going to be able to see that with React and Django. I wanted to make a specific React tutorial dedicated. Praveen, did you see any good questions, anything specific here that we should address? Any things that came up in the chat when I was working on this?
So if there was, then I forget, I think.
Remember to check out Praveen's YouTube channel. What's up?
Yeah. In the private chat, there was 2 questions, if you can check.
Oh, okay. So no, I don't think so. So there's a question here, Praveen. Did you share that from someone else?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question was, does the dynamic parameter always have to be at the end of the URL? And the answer is no. So this URL here inside of app.js here, as long as you're adding in the colon there, right here, you can add in something like this, or / edit, and then maybe even throw in another dynamic parameter. So it does not have to be at the end. So what would the other question was, what would happen without async await? I haven't learned that. Okay, so you know how JavaScript promises work, Praveen?
Yeah.
I know you're more of a Python guy. So anytime you make a request, there's a promise that gets returned. If you don't use async await, what's going to happen is the next line below is going to be called before that response. So you need async await to be able to wait for that return to actually give you the data rather than a promise, which would just be an object, I believe. So you wouldn't get back the JSON data, which was the array or the object. You would get back a promise, and that would throw an error in our code, and it would not work.
Yeah, that would also be non-blocking.
It would be what?
Non-blocking.
Okay, gotcha. So, I'm not sharing the screen. Anyways, yeah, we kind of, here, sorry, I always do that. Okay, so I was referring to this dynamic parameter. Praveen's question was this: can we add in more to this? So we can actually do something like this and then continue with that. So that was the question. Yeah, somebody asked, since we're pushing to route, that's actually something I just didn't account for, but no, we don't have to. In this page here, let's see, in the note button or note page. No, we don't need that. So technically the handle submit method will do this, so we can actually get rid of that. I'm not sure if that will mess up styling. So let's try that. Well, actually the server's off, but no, that you should be able to do it without that. Okay. All right. So Instagram uses Django. Yes, they do. At what point do we deploy Docker? I'm not that familiar with Docker, so I need to talk to Francesco about that, get him on with me here. Yes, this entire stream will stay, so we'll just end it right here. This entire stream will be left on the channel. Remember to get the free Udemy course down in the link description. For the next 3 days, you can get it absolutely free. I was thinking about just making it free completely, but I figured people like the Udemy structure, and Udemy has restrictions when you're making free courses. So I figured as long as I give everyone a shot to get to it, that way I can at least, earn something for my time in putting this together. So Praveen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody for being in the chat. Anybody who's helped out, great questions whenever we had them. Hope you all enjoyed the tutorial, and we'll see you in the next